Chapter 641. Dullahan, 6. I raised my twin daggers, curved, black, and laced with deep dark, and cut through the first night like I was slicing through wet foil. The corruption that had once been steel parted with a whisper, and its armor clattered apart in halves, collapsing into data ash that fizzled and sparked against the cold ground beneath my boots. The deep dark hummed through my veins, satisfied with its work of severing the bonds that held corrupted matter together. The next night raised its rusted greatsword, the blade weeping black ichor that steamed where it hit the ground. I could taste the wrongness in the air, corruption magic, twisted and sick. I ducked low, slashed once across the hamstring, once across the neck, and it dropped too without drama. The familiar weight of my daggers felt reassuring as I exhaled, standing amid the ruin of twisted plate and bone. Then I looked left, and I pursed my lips. Rose and Rachel were doing their work. And by doing their work, I mean systematically disassembling every night within a 10-meter radius as if it were an exam they'd studied for and I hadn't. Both of them were a year younger than me, and both of them were stronger than me at the same mana rank. The math shouldn't have worked that way, but watching them fight was like watching someone explain a joke I'd never quite understood. Rose hovered just slightly above the ground, her long coat fluttering behind her like she didn't quite agree with gravity's attitude toward basic physics. Her gift spun outward, blooming petals of blue roses that shimmered like bent glass in a particle field. 7 circle spells coiled through her limbs like muscle memory. Gravity distortion, bubbles of water, and intense pockets of wind, all stitched into spells that didn't ask reality for permission. One knight raised its shield, tried to charge her. The thing had to weigh 300 pounds, moving with inexorable momentum. Rose didn't even look directly at it. One petal floated by its side. Then it wasn't there anymore. No flash, no boom, just absence. Like someone had taken an eraser to existence and got a little carried away. I felt my eye twitch. Rose made warping reality look about as difficult as brewing tea. Meanwhile, Rachel was less subtle. She moved forward, light collecting in a halo above her back like she was being powered by a nuclear heart. Her hair floated around her like she was underwater, each strand moving in currents of pure magical energy. The hammer she conjured from her magic was made of pure light, but it had the weight of something far older, like it had been carved out of ancient purpose and divine wrath. She brought it down on one of the knights. It didn't explode. It decomposed, atom by atom, breaking into motes of golden dust that screamed as they left the world. The sound made my teeth ache and my deep dark recoil instinctively. Another knight leaped at her, sword raised overhead. She sidestepped with dancer's grace, swung the hammer sideways, and caved in its chest plate like she was knocking down a door she didn't like. The corpse flipped twice before skidding into the rubble, where it quietly burst into white fire. I blinked. Again. Rachel took another breath and lifted her other hand. Magic swirled around her fingers, forming runes that pulsed with divine authority. Lightning lanced through the sky, aimed precisely between the eyes of the next knight. It didn't just fall. It submitted whatever twisted consciousness animated it, acknowledging its fundamental wrongness before allowing itself the mercy of destruction. Ridiculous, I muttered under my breath. A group of 3 came at me next, 2 with halberds and 1 with a longsword too big for any real person to wield. I rushed in to meet them anyway, deep dark crawling up my arms like a second skin. The magic felt cold and hungry, eager to resume its work. I parried the first halberd with a dagger flick, spun past the second one, and let my momentum carry me into a low dash. My left dagger scraped along the gap in the sword knight's thigh armor. Found it, and I plunged the right one into the underside of his jaw. The body spasmed, then dropped like a marionette with cut strings. But there were too many. Undead knights spilling out of the fog like cockroaches from a broken wall. Endless, armored, and armed. I twisted, dodged, slashed. I was clean, clinical, efficient. Everything my instructors had drilled into me about precision combat. But not untouchable. Rose was. She spun once, her petals orbiting her like blades on a gyroscope. A dozen knights were turned into collapsing possibilities. Another tried to sneak up behind her. She didn't turn. The petal cut it in half diagonally, and both halves fell away like they'd never belonged together. Rachel took a bolt of spectral fire to the side but grunted and kept moving. She didn't retreat. She advanced. Her eyes glowed with something more than power, with conviction, and then she started chanting. I felt the mana respond. The air rippled like heat shimmer, power gathering around Rachel like a visible aura. Her next hammer strike didn't just break a knight. It vaporized a crater into the landscape behind it. A knight tried to stab her during the windup. She back-kicked it into a tree. The tree lost. The two of them were devastation in motion. One warping reality, the other purifying it with divine authority. And I was keeping up, I supposed. Barely. The last knight fell with a shriek that fizzled into digital ash, its helmet rolling to a stop near my boot like some final punctuation mark. All was quiet, save for the distant groaning of the battlefield and the flickering afterglow of too many spells burned too quickly. Rachel stood a few paces ahead, her hammer dissolving into particles of pure light. She turned her head slightly, brows knitting together as if some inner tension had tugged at her spine. Then she spoke. "He's fighting." I blinked, still catching my breath. "Who?" "Arthur." Her voice was soft, but certain. "He's inside a domain." Rose looked up from wiping blood, real or otherwise, off her hand. Her eyes sharpened. "A domain? He must be in danger even with Reka." Rachel didn't answer. She had already begun moving, her hand reaching toward her back, except there had been nothing there moments ago. And then there was. The air shimmered as she pulled it into existence. An ancient-grade artifact, one whose power even the dead might hesitate before approaching. A bow, silver and gold and singing softly in a language the world had mostly forgotten. Runes scrawled along its limbs like constellations from some holy map, alive and whispering. I stared at the weapon and felt my blood go cold. The bow radiated power that made my deep dark magic cower like a frightened animal. "That's..." My voice cracked despite my best efforts. "That's a relic of the first choir." Rachel didn't acknowledge me. She simply notched an arrow, one sculpted from pure light itself, and raised the bow toward the distant battle. The arrowhead flared. She didn't fire. "The domain's stopping me," she muttered. Rachel's jaw clenched. She drew the bow anyway, holding the pressure, the artifact humming louder now, almost protesting. "I can't reach him." Rose exhaled. "Then let's cheat." She stepped closer, lifted her palm, and pressed 2 fingers to the arrow's shaft. Her petals began to swirl again, this time not just blue. Golden hues bled into the swirl like they were being painted mid-air. A fusion of pure light and Rose's warped, reality-defying magic. Petals spun outward from the arrow, orbiting it like satellites. Each one was forged from Rachel's will and Rose's command of unreality, shaped into something that could touch the untouchable. The bow changed too. A new ring formed behind the string, like a ripple in time. The arrow brightened. The air buzzed with potential energy that made my bones vibrate. Together, they had made something that didn't care about domains. Rachel breathed in. Her eyes locked on the distant clash, where flickers of Arthur's swordplay and Reka's desperation sparked against the backdrop of darkness. Then she loosed. The arrow tore through the world like a falling star, reality parting before it like curtains being drawn aside. It didn't follow a normal trajectory. It curved through dimensions I couldn't perceive, guided by Rose's manipulation and powered by Rachel's divine authority. Chapter 642. Dullahan, 7. Sixth movement of my Grade 5 Art CQC, 0-inch punch. I had to get dangerously close to the Dullahan's massive frame, close enough to smell the grave rot that clung to its ethereal form like a second skin. This technique was infinitely more difficult than even the 1-inch punch, not just because of the proximity required, but because of the sheer complexity of the mana manipulation involved. In my previous world, this had been nothing more than a parlor trick. A flashy demonstration that martial artists used to impress crowds who didn't understand the mechanics behind it. But here, in this realm where mana flowed through everything like blood through veins, the 0-inch punch became something else entirely. It became devastation condensed into a single point of contact. The technique required me to compress all my available mana into a space smaller than a pinhead, then release it in a controlled explosion at the exact moment of impact. The timing had to be perfect. Too early and the energy would dissipate uselessly. Too late and it would backfire into my own body. I struck. My fist connected with the Dullahan's chest plate, and for a split second, nothing seemed to happen. Then reality caught up with physics. The ancient armor shattered like spun glass, fragments spinning away in slow motion as the concentrated force tore through it. The creature's upper body followed suit, disintegrating completely under the focused assault. Ethereal flesh and spectral bone became nothing more than mist and memory, scattered to the winds of the domain. But even as I watched the devastation unfold, I knew it wouldn't be enough. The Dullahan began to regenerate almost immediately, wisps of dark energy coalescing back into recognizable form. Muscle reformed over bone, armor knitted itself back together, and those hollow eye sockets began to glow once more with malevolent intelligence. This monster! The thought blazed through my mind as I raised my sword, my arm feeling as heavy as lead. The 0-inch punch had drained more mana than I'd anticipated, leaving me dangerously depleted in the middle of combat. I could feel exhaustion creeping through my limbs like poison, making every movement sluggish and imprecise. The Dullahan's regeneration accelerated, flesh and bone snapping back into place with wet, organic sounds that made my stomach turn. Just as the creature's torso began to solidify, the space around us fractured. Reality split like cracked glass, revealing glimpses of otherworldly light bleeding through the dimensional barriers. The domain itself seemed to recoil from whatever force was approaching, its dark energies writhing away from the growing brightness. Then a wave of pure, divine light erupted through the fractures, washing over the Dullahan like a tsunami of concentrated starlight. The creature's half-formed body didn't just dissolve. It was erased, removed from existence with such thoroughness that even the memory of its presence seemed to fade from the air. I staggered backward, shielding my eyes from the brilliant radiance. When the light finally faded, nothing remained of the Dullahan except a perfect 9-star skeleton lying pristine on the scorched ground, its bone structure radiating power even in death. The domain began to collapse around us, its anchoring point destroyed. Walls of twisted reality crumbled like sand castles, revealing the ash-gray landscape of the territories beyond. Master! Reika's voice cut through the dissipating magical static as she rushed toward me, her usually perfect composure replaced by genuine concern. Her silver hair was disheveled, and I could see traces of exhaustion in the way she moved. She'd been channeling defensive magic this entire time, probably burning through her own reserves to keep the domain's influence from overwhelming me. Before I could respond, 3 familiar figures emerged from the settling dust. Rachel, Rose, and Callie, moving with the purposeful stride of people who'd just finished their own battle. Rachel still held that impossible bow, its golden runes slowly fading back to dormancy. Rose's coat fluttered around her like she'd forgotten to inform gravity that the fight was over. And Callie, well, Callie looked as composed as ever, though I could see the tension in her shoulders beginning to ease. Arthur! Rachel's voice carried a note of barely controlled panic as she broke into a run. Her blonde hair caught the filtered sunlight streaming through the dissipating domain, and I could see the golden flecks in her sapphire eyes blazing with worry and relief in equal measure. Rose was right behind her, auburn hair flying as she closed the distance between us. Her brown eyes were wide with concern, scanning me for injuries with the intensity of someone who'd spent the last few minutes imagining the worst possible outcomes. They reached me at the same time, and suddenly I found myself surrounded by warm hands checking for wounds, gentle fingers tracing the cuts on my arms, worried voices talking over each other in a symphony of relief and residual fear. Are you hurt? Rose's hands were already glowing with diagnostic magic, her touch sending warm tingles through my battered body. That was incredibly reckless, Rachel added, though her tone was more relieved than accusatory. A domain that strong, with just the 2 of you. We're fine, I started to say, but Reika chose that moment to stumble slightly, exhaustion finally catching up with her. I caught her arm to steady her, and immediately turned to fix her with my sternest expression. Reika, what the hell were you thinking? You burned through nearly all your mana maintaining those defensive barriers. You could have been killed. She looked up at me with those luminous violet eyes in the shape of the flower, and instead of the contrition I was expecting, she just giggled. Actually giggled. Like I told her a particularly amusing joke instead of scolding her for risking her life. Master is worried about me, she said, her voice carrying that musical quality that always made it impossible to stay angry with her for long. That makes me happy. I felt my stern expression cracking despite my best efforts. Of course I'm worried about you, you impossible woman. You're supposed to be the responsible one between us. She hummed thoughtfully, swaying slightly on her feet. But Master needed help, so I helped. Simple. Before I could launch into a proper lecture about battlefield priorities and acceptable risk assessment, Rachel stepped forward with her hands already glowing with healing magic. Let me take care of both of you, she said, her voice carrying that tone of gentle authority that brooked no argument. You're both running on fumes, and we still have work to do. The healing magic felt like warm honey flowing through my veins, washing away exhaustion and mending the dozens of small cuts and bruises I'd accumulated during the fight. Rachel's touch was always precise, clinical in its efficiency but somehow still tender. I could feel my mana reserves slowly beginning to replenish as her magic worked to restore my body's natural energy flow. She moved to Reika next, her healing light washing over my companion's pale features. The violet-haired woman's exhaustion began to fade, replaced by her usual serene composure. Thank you, Reika murmured, offering Rachel a small bow that was returned with a warm smile. While Rachel worked, I walked over to where the Dullahan's remains lay scattered across the ground. The 9-star skeleton was intact, its bone structure gleaming with an inner light that spoke of immense power. 9-star materials were incredibly rare, the kind of components that master crafters would kill for. I carefully gathered the bones into my storage ring, handling each piece with the reverence it deserved. I was lucky to survive that, I admitted aloud, thinking about how close the fight had been. If you hadn't intervened when you did. But we did, Rose said firmly, moving to stand beside me. Her hand found mine, fingers intertwining with casual intimacy. That's what partners do. Callie approached from the other side, her black eyes surveying the aftermath of our respective battles with professional interest. The corruption in this area is significantly reduced, she reported. Whatever was anchoring it here, that Dullahan was probably the source. I nodded, feeling the truth of her observation. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down on this section of the Ashen Territories was noticeably lighter now. The very air felt cleaner, less tainted by the necrotic energies that usually permeated these lands. One step closer to our goal, I said, looking toward the horizon where our true objective waited. The zombie crown was still out there somewhere, hidden in the deepest, most dangerous parts of the territories. But today had proven that we could handle whatever the wasteland threw at us. Rachel finished her healing work and moved to join our small circle, her presence completing the group. For a moment, we all stood in comfortable silence, watching the last traces of the domain's influence fade away like morning mist. So, Rose said eventually, her voice carrying a note of anticipation, ready to continue our tour of this delightfully cheerful landscape? I couldn't help but smile at her dry tone. Despite everything we'd just been through, despite the dangers that still lay ahead, I felt optimistic. Let's go find ourselves a crown, I said, and started walking toward the deeper territories, my partners falling into step beside me. The real adventure was just beginning. Chapter 643, Zombie Princess, 1. The Ashen Territories stretched before us like a wound in the world that had never properly healed. Rachel's healing magic had done its work well. The exhaustion that had threatened to drag me down was replaced by renewed vitality. Beside me, Reika moved with her usual fluid grace, showing no signs of the mana depletion that had nearly overwhelmed her during the domain battle. Rachel's touch had been thorough as always, Of course, we weren't at full strength, but we could move around well enough now. We'd been walking for 3 hours now, picking our way through a landscape that seemed determined to remind us that death was the natural state of things. The ground beneath our boots was a mixture of volcanic ash and bone dust, creating a peculiar texture that crunched with each step. Ancient trees, petrified by some long-forgotten catastrophe, stood like twisted sentinels against the perpetually overcast sky. Their branches reached toward the heavens in silent supplication, as if frozen in the moment of their final plea for salvation. The air tasted of sulfur and regret. The corruption levels are decreasing the deeper we go, Callie observed, her black eyes scanning the horizon with professional interest. That's counterintuitive, Rose said, her auburn hair catching what little light filtered through the ash-laden clouds. Usually, corruption concentrates toward the center of these places, unless something is actively suppressing it, Rachel added, her blonde hair seeming to glow with its own inner light against the dreary backdrop. The golden flecks in her sapphire eyes caught and reflected what little illumination existed, making her look almost ethereal in the gloom. I nodded, though my attention was only partially on their conversation. The majority of my focus was occupied by a more immediate concern. Specifically, the silver-haired woman walking slightly behind and to my left, maintaining the perfect distance of a bodyguard while somehow making it look like a dance. Reka. The way she moved through this desolate landscape was almost hypnotic. Where the rest of us trudged through ash and debris, she seemed to glide, her feet barely disturbing the ground. Her silver hair caught occasional glints of light, creating an ethereal halo effect that was both beautiful and somehow melancholy. Every few minutes, she would turn her head slightly to scan our surroundings, and I would catch glimpses of her profile, the elegant curve of her neck, the determined set of her jaw, the way her silver eyes seemed to hold depths that went far beyond her apparent age. She was in love with me. I knew this with the same certainty that I knew the sun would rise tomorrow, even in this forsaken place where the sky never seemed to clear. It wasn't something she'd ever said directly. Reka was far too subtle for such crude declarations. Instead, she expressed it in the way she called me master, infusing that single word with layers of meaning that made my chest tight with emotions I wasn't ready to examine. The title itself was a kind of poetry, a way of expressing devotion while maintaining plausible deniability. To anyone listening, it was simply the address of a servant to her employer. But I could hear the way her voice softened when she said it, could see the brief flash of something vulnerable in her eyes before she looked away. It was love disguised as duty, passion hidden behind propriety. And that made it troublesome. Not because I didn't care for her, quite the opposite. Reka was brilliant, deadly, loyal to a fault, and possessed of a quiet strength that never failed to impress me. She was also beautiful in a way that made me forget how to breathe properly when she smiled, which was rare enough to feel like a gift when it happened. No, the problem was that I already had Rachel, Rose, Cecilia, and Serafina, and navigating those 4 relationships required more emotional intelligence than I was entirely comfortable possessing. Adding another layer of complexity to an already delicate situation seemed like asking for trouble. You're overthinking this. Luna's voice drifted through my mind, carrying her usual tone of amused exasperation. The Qilin had been unusually quiet after the battle concluded, but apparently, my internal romantic turmoil was too entertaining for her to ignore. Just tell her how you feel. It's not that simple, I responded mentally, careful not to let any of my conversation show on my face. The others were still discussing corruption patterns and about the land. Of course it is, Luna laughed, and I could practically feel her rolling her eyes. You like her. She likes you. Everyone else can see it. The only person pretending this is complicated is you. I already have 4 girlfriends. Adding a 5th seems greedy, ambitious, perfectly normal for someone with your particular circumstances. Luna's amusement was palpable. Face it, Arthur. At the rate you're going, you'll have a 5th wife by the time you marry. The mental image that conjured me standing at some kind of altar with a line of women in wedding dresses stretching out behind me like I was collecting wives instead of fighting monsters made me shudder visibly. Master! Reka's voice was soft, concerned. She'd noticed my reaction, of course. She noticed everything. "Are you unwell?" "Fine," I said quickly, perhaps a bit too quickly. "Just thinking about tactical considerations." She nodded, accepting the explanation without question, though I caught the brief flash of something that might have been disappointment in her eyes. Or maybe I was projecting. It was becoming increasingly difficult to tell the difference. We continued walking, the landscape gradually shifting around us. The petrified trees gave way to what had once been a city, or at least the skeletal remains of one. Broken spires reached toward the sky like accusing fingers, their surfaces blackened by whatever catastrophe had claimed this place. The streets were rivers of ash and bone, and the silence was so complete it felt almost aggressive. "There," Callie said suddenly, pointing toward what had once been the city center. "Do you see it?" I followed her gaze and felt my heart skip a beat. Rising from the ruins like a monument to despair was a structure that defied easy description. It was part cathedral, part mausoleum, and part something else entirely, something that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on its geometry too directly. The building seemed to exist in more dimensions than it should, its walls folding in on themselves in ways that violated several laws of physics. And at its very peak, clearly visible even from this distance, was our objective. The zombie crown. It sat atop the impossible spire like a dark star, radiating malevolent energy that I could feel even from here. The artifact was smaller than I'd expected, no bigger than a real crown, but the power emanating from it was unmistakable. This was the source of the corruption that had been slowly spreading through the territories for decades, the anchor point that allowed the undead to maintain their presence in this realm. It was also exactly what I needed. "Well," Rose said, her voice carrying a note of dry appreciation, "that's not ominous at all. The structure appears to be some kind of dimensional fold," Rachel observed, her healing-trained eyes analyzing the building with clinical precision. "Getting inside might be challenging. The real question," Callie added, "is what's guarding it. Something that powerful doesn't just sit unprotected." I nodded, my mind already working through potential approaches. The crown was there, tantalizingly close but obviously dangerous to obtain. The building itself would likely be full of traps, guardians, and other unpleasant surprises. Getting to the artifact would require careful planning, precise execution, and probably more luck than I was comfortable relying on. But that was a problem for when we got closer. For now, it was enough to know that our objective was real, that it was here, and that it was obtainable. Chapter 644, Zombie Princess 2. The impossible cathedral loomed before us, its twisted spires defying every law of architecture I'd ever learned. After hours of traversing the Ashen territories, fighting through death nights and finally defeating that damn Dullahan, we'd finally reached our destination. The dimensional folding of the structure was even more disorienting up close. Walls that should have been parallel instead curved into spaces that my eyes insisted couldn't exist. The deep dark concentration has been steadily increasing since we entered the territories, Callie observed, her black eyes bright with something approaching anticipation. But here, at the epicenter, it's incredible. She was right. We'd been walking through deep dark and rich terrain for hours now, but the closer we got to this cathedral, the thicker the ambient energy became. For someone with Callie's affinity, this place had to feel like discovering a natural spring of pure power. Even I could feel it calling to the deep dark magic in my core, resonating with frequencies that made my circuits hum. Rachel lacked energy in her steps, having come to the conclusion the death nights and Dullahan we faced were once her family's nights. I consoled her as she leaned her head against me, and I rubbed her back while we continued to walk. The zombie crown sat atop the cathedral's highest spire, clearly visible even from this distance. Its obsidian surface seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it, creating a void in the visual spectrum that hurt to look at directly. Even at this range, I could feel its power. Ancient-grade artifacts had a presence that was unmistakable, a weight that pressed against the soul of anyone sensitive enough to perceive it. Ancient-grade artifacts choose their wielders, Reka said, more for the sake of completeness than because anyone needed the reminder. It was common knowledge among mages of our level. The question is whether it will accept Callie. It will, Callie said with quiet certainty, flexing her fingers as shadows coiled around them like living things. I can feel its interest. She was right, of course. In the novel, Callie became a zombie princess, so there was no doubt she would succeed here. We approached the cathedral's entrance, a wound in reality that seemed to bleed shadow into the surrounding air. The architecture defied rational analysis, existing in more dimensions than should have been possible. Stairs led upward and downward simultaneously, corridors branched into themselves, and doorways opened onto rooms that contained the passages that led to them. This place makes my head hurt, Rose muttered, her gift causing a few blue rose petals to materialize as her subconscious tried to impose some order on the chaos around us. Don't try to understand it, I advised, leading the group through passages that folded in on themselves like origami made from crystallized space. Just follow the path and trust that it leads where we need to go. The walls were covered in symbols that writhed when observed directly, script in languages that had been dead since before the First Kingdoms rose. The whole structure reeked of ancient magic and concentrated death, power that had been fermenting in deep dark energy for over a decade. As we climbed or descended or possibly moved sideways through folded space, Callie's excitement became increasingly apparent. Her usual composed demeanor was giving way to something I'd rarely seen from her: genuine anticipation. The concentration is incredible, she said, her voice carrying notes of wonder. It's like the entire structure is a massive deep dark focus, channeling and amplifying the ambient energy. That's probably exactly what it is, Rachel replied, her healing-trained senses picking up on the magical currents flowing through the building. When an arch-lich dies, especially one as powerful as the creature Father faced, the deep dark doesn't just dissipate. It soaks into everything nearby, transforming the environment, creating the perfect conditions for artifacts like the zombie crown to reach their full potential. I added, understanding the implications. The crown wasn't just sitting here. It was being empowered by its environment, growing stronger with each passing year. The path spiraled upward through impossible geometries until we finally emerged into a circular chamber at the structure's peak. After the dimensional maze below, the room was almost shockingly simple. A perfect circle of black stone, with a pedestal of crystallized darkness at its center. And on that pedestal sat the zombie crown. It was magnificent in a way that defied description. The crown was forged from what looked like crystallized void, its surface so dark it seemed to create holes in reality wherever light touched it. Gems that weren't quite gems were set into its band. Stones that existed in the spaces between colors, reflecting hues that human language had no words for. Runes covered every surface, script written in the fundamental language of death itself. But what made it truly awe-inspiring was the power it radiated. Ancient-grade artifacts were always significant, but this one felt different. More complete, more purposeful. Like it had been waiting for exactly the right moment, the right person to fulfill its destiny. It's calling to me, Callie said softly, her voice carrying an almost dreamy quality. I can hear it, not with my ears, but with something deeper. It's been waiting. She stepped toward the pedestal with the confidence of someone who had finally found what they'd been searching for their entire life. There was no hesitation in her movement, no uncertainty. The deep dark energy that saturated this place, that had been building in intensity since we'd entered the territories hours ago, was singing in harmony with whatever power the crown contained. Callie, I said quietly, though I wasn't sure if I was offering encouragement or a warning. She turned to look at me, and I saw something in her black eyes that I'd never seen before. A kind of peaceful resolution, as if she'd finally found her place in the world. This is what I was meant for, she said simply. The zombie crown doesn't just grant power, it transforms someone into what they were always supposed to become. And I was always meant to be more than human. Ancient-grade artifacts were known to be selective, and attempting to claim one that rejected you could result in anything from painful feedback to complete annihilation. But I could see in Callie's posture that she wasn't worried. The crown wanted her as much as she wanted it. She reached out slowly, reverently, her fingers hovering just above the obsidian surface. The air in the chamber seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment of contact that would change everything. When her fingertips finally touched the crown, the world exploded into darkness. Power poured from the artifact like a tsunami of liquid shadow, but instead of the violent rejection I'd half expected, its response was welcoming, almost gentle. The deep dark energy that had been building in Callie's system over hours of exposure to this environment suddenly found a focus, a purpose. The crown wasn't just accepting her, it was completing her. Callie lifted the zombie crown from its pedestal, and I watched as understanding dawned in her eyes. Ancient-grade artifacts didn't just choose their wielders. They communicated with them, sharing knowledge about their history, their purpose, their true nature. "I see," she said quietly, her voice already beginning to carry new harmonics. The Arch-Lich created this crown not as a tool of domination, but as a gift, a way to elevate someone beyond the boundaries of life and death. "But he never found a suitable candidate," Rachel observed, understanding the implications.
"No."
He was too proud, too controlling. He couldn't bear the thought of sharing power, even with his own creation. Callie turned the crown over in her hands, studying its construction with newfound appreciation. So it sat here, protected by the corrupted knights of the family that would eventually destroy him, waiting for someone worthy. "And now?" Rose asked, though we all knew the answer. Callie looked at each of us in turn, her expression serious but not unkind. "Now it has found its purpose. The crown chooses to elevate me, to transform me into what this world needs. A zombie princess, a being who can bridge the gap between life and death." The implications hung in the air like a promise and a threat combined. The transformation would change Callie fundamentally, elevate her beyond mortal limitations while binding her to powers that most people couldn't even comprehend. "The preparatory rituals were completed weeks ago," she continued, referring to the complex magical work we'd done to align her spiritual essence with the necessary frequencies. "All that remains is the actual coronation." I nodded, understanding the weight of what was about to happen. "Are you ready for this?" Callie's smile was small but genuine, carrying a confidence that made something tight in my chest ease. "I've been ready since the day I first felt the deep dark respond to my will. This is just the next step." The chamber around us seemed to pulse with anticipation, the crystallized darkness beneath our feet resonating with the crown's awakening. Ancient magic stirred in the walls, responding to power that had been dormant for over a decade. Soon the ritual would begin. Soon Callie would be transformed into something beyond mortal comprehension. A zombie princess, a being of pure deep dark energy given form and purpose. The crown pulsed once in her hands, eager to fulfill the destiny it had been created for. In this place saturated with the death essence of an Arch-Lich, surrounded by power that had been fermenting for years, the transformation would be unlike anything the world had seen. Everything was ready. All that remained was to crown a zombie princess. Chapter 645. Zombie Princess 3. The cathedral's circular chamber responded to the zombie crown's awakening. Crystallized darkness spreading outward in patterns I'd calculated months ago during the planning phase. Everything was proceeding exactly as I'd designed it. "Positions," I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who had orchestrated every detail of what was about to happen. "Rose, northern point. Rachel, eastern. Reka, you'll anchor from the west." They moved without hesitation, trusting in the plan I'd spent weeks perfecting. This wasn't some ancient ritual we were stumbling through. This was a precisely engineered magical operation, every component selected for maximum efficiency and minimal risk. "Callie," I said, meeting her black eyes as she stood in the center holding the crown. "Ready." Her nod carried complete confidence in my planning. "The preparatory work was thorough. Your calculations were perfect." Of course they were. I'd spent a long time researching the theoretical framework for this transformation, studying every text on zombie royalty I could find, analyzing the magical resonances required to safely elevate someone to that level of power. The risks were manageable when you understood the underlying mechanics. "Rose, initiate paradox field," I commanded. "We need reality to be flexible for the next few minutes. Rose closed her eyes and extended her hands. Paradox. Blue roses bloomed from nothing, their petals existing in multiple states simultaneously. Some opened while closing, others grew backward through their life cycle, and a few simply ignored causality entirely. Within seconds, the normal rules governing existence became negotiable, creating the perfect environment for a transformation that would normally be impossible. Field established, Rose reported, her voice carrying impossible harmonics. Reality is now optional, as requested. Perfect. The paradox field was the first crucial component. Without it, the transformation would tear Callie apart at the molecular level. But with reality's constraints temporarily suspended, we could safely rewrite the fundamental nature of her existence. Reika, begin adaptation protocols, I said, watching as she pressed her palms together. Cursed script. Symbols materialized in the air around us, not random mystical nonsense, but specific instructions I'd helped her design. The floating script was written in the fundamental language of magic itself, commands that would restructure our magical circuits to handle the massive energy transfers about to take place. Optimization in progress, Reika reported, her voice strained but confident. Spiritual foundations reinforced according to specifications. I felt the changes immediately. My own circuits adapted, widening to accommodate the deep dark energies I'd need to manipulate during the transformation. But more importantly, I could sense Callie's magical pathways restructuring themselves, preparing for the astronomical power increase she was about to experience. Now, Callie, I said, my deep dark magic already beginning to coalesce around my hands. Place the crown. The moment the zombie crown made contact with her black hair, I was ready. Dark energy exploded outward from the artifact, but instead of letting it run wild, I immediately began shaping it with my own deep dark manipulation. This was the critical moment. The crown's power needed to be guided, channeled through specific pathways to ensure Callie's transformation proceeded smoothly. I reached out with my magic, grasping the torrents of deep dark energy flowing from the crown and directing them through the patterns I'd calculated. The power was immense, enough to level a city block if mishandled, but I'd prepared for this. My months of brutal circuit training had been specifically designed to give me the control necessary for this operation. Steady, I said, more to myself than to Callie. She was handling her part perfectly, embracing the transformation rather than fighting it. Power flow stabilizing. The crown's energy poured through her, but under my guidance, it followed precise channels rather than causing random destruction. I could feel her mana signature climbing silver to gold to the lower reaches of ascendant rank, exactly as I'd predicted. But then something unexpected happened. A pulse of energy from Reika's position made me turn, just in time to see her own aura explode outward. The cursed script floating around her blazed with renewed intensity as her mana signature began to climb alongside Callie's. I blinked, quickly analyzing the situation. The adaptation protocols Reika had established weren't just helping Callie. They were creating a feedback loop, a magical resonance that was elevating both of them simultaneously. Interesting, I thought, adjusting my deep dark manipulation to account for this development. It wasn't what I'd planned, but it wasn't necessarily problematic either. If anything, having two mid-ascendant rank allies would be even better than one. I guided the energy flows more carefully now, ensuring that both transformations proceeded safely. Callie's elevation to zombie princess was the primary objective, but if Reika was going to be pulled along for the ride, I'd make sure she survived the process intact. The transformation reached its crescendo. Callie's body existed in multiple states simultaneously thanks to Rose's paradox field. Alive and dead, mortal and eternal, flesh and spirit. The contradictions that should have torn her apart were instead making her stronger, more complete. The zombie crown settled onto her head with a sound like distant thunder, its obsidian surface merging seamlessly with her black hair. Runes blazed to life along its surface, fed by the carefully channeled deep dark energy I'd been directing. For a moment, everything was perfectly balanced. Then Callie opened her eyes. They held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies of darkness, star-void spaces where light went to die. When she looked at me, I felt the weight of her new nature. Still Callie, but also something transcendent. A being who existed in the spaces between life and death, wielding power over entropy itself. "Arthur," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated with every deep dark practitioner in the chamber. "Your planning was flawless." I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction. Of course it was. I'd spent months calculating every variable, accounting for every possible complication. The transformation had proceeded exactly as designed, with only minor variations that had actually improved the final outcome. "How do you feel?" I asked, though I could already sense the answer through our shared deep dark connection. "Complete," she replied, tilting her head as the crown caught the chamber's dim light. "Like every moment before this was just preparation for what I've become." I nodded, letting Rose's paradox field collapse and allowing Reika's curse script to dissolve back into ambient mana. The magical frameworks I'd designed had served their purpose perfectly. "Mid-ascendant rank," Rachel observed, her healing senses picking up on the power levels radiating from both Callie and Reika. "Both of you." The resonance was an unexpected bonus, I admitted, analyzing the magical link I had sensed between Callie and Reika. "But not unwelcome. Having a zombie princess with a mid-ascendant rank companion significantly improves our operational capabilities." Callie's smile was both beautiful and terrifying, her new nature lending otherworldly authority to even simple expressions. "Your strategic planning never ceases to amaze me." I shrugged, as if orchestrating the creation of a zombie princess was just another day's work. "It's all about understanding the underlying mechanics. Once you map out the magical resonances and account for the energy flows, the rest is just execution." Rose shook her head in bemused admiration. "You say that like it's simple. Most people would consider what we just did completely impossible." "Most people don't plan properly," I replied. "They rely on luck and improvisation instead of careful preparation and precise execution." The truth was, this transformation represented months of meticulous planning. I'd studied every available text on zombie royalty, analyzed the magical requirements for safe elevation to ascendant rank, and designed specific roles for each of my companions' gifts. The success wasn't luck. It was the inevitable result of thorough preparation. "Shall we return?" Callie asked, her star-void eyes meeting mine. "I believe our objectives have been completed." I nodded, already mentally cataloging the implications of what we'd accomplished. A zombie princess and 2 mid-ascendant rank allies would certainly change the strategic landscape. But that was a problem for later analysis. For now, it was enough that my plan had succeeded flawlessly. The zombie princess was born, and everything had proceeded exactly as I designed it. Chapter 646. Extraction 1. After succeeding in turning Callie into a zombie princess, I returned to the Creighton estate with the 4 girls. The transformation had gone flawlessly, exactly as I'd planned, and now it was time to capitalize on our success. The Ashen territories held far more valuable necromantic materials than just the zombie crown, and Rose had already demonstrated her business acumen by preparing extraction operations before we'd even returned. "It's good having such a smart employee," I said as I grabbed Rose by the waist, pulling her closer in the privacy of the estate's study. "I do my best," she replied, leaning her head against my chest with that practiced casualness she'd perfected. Rachel was currently meeting with her father Alastair, no doubt briefing him on our expedition. Reika and Callie were elsewhere in the estate, probably adjusting to the increase in mana rank and strength, which left just me and Rose to handle the business side of our little adventure. She was sitting on my lap now, acting like she wasn't affected by our proximity as we reviewed the extraction plans spread across the mahogany desk. But I could see the telltale signs, the way her neck had flushed a delicate pink, the slight tension in her shoulders, the careful way she avoided looking directly at me when she spoke. It was adorable, really. Rose could command reality itself with her gift, could make the impossible seem routine, but put her in close contact with me and she turned into a flustered mess trying to pretend she was completely composed. "The preliminary surveys indicate significant deposits of Death's Heart crystals in the cathedral's lower levels," she said, her voice admirably steady as she pointed to specific locations on the map. My extraction teams should be able to harvest them without disturbing the dimensional stability. I hummed in agreement, but instead of focusing on the map, I let my hand rest on her hip, thumb tracing idle patterns through the fabric of her dress. And the timeline for full extraction? Her breath caught slightly at the contact, though she tried to hide it by clearing her throat. 3 weeks, maybe 4. The magical saturation makes standard equipment unreliable, so we'll need to use specialized tools. Smart, I said, leaning forward slightly so my breath ghosted across her ear as I studied the documents over her shoulder. What about the crystallized deep dark formations we found in the outer chambers? Rose's pen hesitated for just a moment, barely noticeable unless you were watching for it. Those will require more delicate handling. The energy density could make them unstable if extracted improperly. I couldn't help but smile at how she was trying so hard to maintain professional composure while I made it increasingly difficult for her to concentrate. My free hand moved to her waist, fingers splaying across the curve of her side. "You're very thorough," I murmured, letting my voice drop to that lower register I knew affected her. "Always thinking 3 steps ahead." "Someone has to," she replied, but her voice had taken on a slightly breathless quality that betrayed her attempt at nonchalance. "You're too busy being dramatic with ancient artifacts to worry about practical concerns like profit margins and extraction logistics." I laughed softly, the sound vibrating through my chest where she was pressed against me. "Is that so?" And here I thought my dramatic flair was part of my charm. "Your charm," she said, finally turning to look at me with those beautiful brown eyes, "is considerably more subtle than your ego would suggest." "Subtle?" I raised an eyebrow, my hand sliding up to rest just below her ribcage. "There's nothing subtle about this." Her composure cracked just slightly, a faint flush spreading from her neck to her cheeks. "Arthur." "Yes?" I asked innocently, as if I weren't deliberately making it impossible for her to focus on the financial projections she was supposed to be reviewing. She tried to turn back to the documents, but I could see the way her hands trembled slightly as she reached for another report. The projected revenue from necromantic materials should offset the expedition costs within 6 months. I shifted slightly, adjusting our position so she was more firmly settled against me, and was rewarded with the soft intake of breath she tried to hide. "That's impressive profit margins. Your business instincts really are exceptional." Thank you," she managed, though she was clearly struggling to remember what numbers she was supposed to be calculating. I let my thumb trace along her ribs, a gentle but unmistakably intimate gesture. "Of course, we'll need to factor in the increased security costs." "Right, security." Rose's voice was getting progressively more distracted. She fumbled with the papers, nearly dropping one before catching it. "We'll need to coordinate with." She trailed off, clearly having lost track of what she was trying to say, as I continued my gentle ministrations. The flush had spread to her ears now, and I could feel the way her breathing had become slightly uneven. "You were saying?" I prompted, enjoying the way she was coming undone despite her best efforts to maintain professional distance. "I was saying that you're—" She turned in my lap to face me more directly, her brown eyes slightly unfocused. "You're making it very difficult to concentrate on work." "Am I?" I asked with mock concern, even as my hands settled more firmly on her waist. "I'm just appreciating your exceptional planning skills." She gave me a look that was half exasperation, half something much warmer. "Your appreciation is very distracting." "I'll try to contain my enthusiasm," I said solemnly, though I made no move to actually give her more space. Rose tried valiantly to return her attention to the documents, but I could see she was fighting a losing battle. Her pen hovered over a calculation she'd already completed twice, and she kept losing track of which report she was supposed to be reviewing next. "Arthur," she said finally, setting down her pen with deliberate precision, "if you keep this up, we're never going to finish the quarterly projections." "The projections can wait," I said, studying the way her carefully controlled expression was starting to show cracks. Besides, watching you try to pretend you're not affected is far more entertaining than reviewing extraction timelines. That did it. Something snapped in her composure, and before I could react, she turned fully in my lap and kissed me. It was supposed to be a quick, decisive gesture, probably her attempt to take control of the situation. But the moment our lips met, I could feel her resolve melting away. The kiss deepened, became less calculated and more desperate, her hands moving to grip my shoulders as if I might disappear if she didn't hold on tight enough. When we finally broke apart, she was breathing hard, her carefully styled auburn hair slightly mussed and her brown eyes wide with a mixture of satisfaction and embarrassment. "There," she said, trying to sound triumphant despite the obvious flush coloring her cheeks. "Now maybe we can get back to work." I couldn't help but grin at her attempt to regain control. "Is that how you handle all your business meetings?" The flush deepened. "Only the ones where my business partner is being insufferably distracting." "Insufferable?" I raised an eyebrow, letting my hands settle more securely around her waist. "That seems harsh. I prefer strategically focused." She rolled her eyes, but I could see the smile she was trying to suppress. "You're impossible." "And you?" I said, leaning closer until our faces were only inches apart. "Are adorable when you're flustered." "I am not flustered," she protested, even as she unconsciously leaned into the proximity.
No.
I brushed a strand of auburn hair away from her face, letting my fingers trail along her cheek. "Then why are you blushing?" "I'm not." She started to argue, then seemed to realize the futility of the denial. Instead, she just pouted, which was somehow even more endearing than her attempts at professional composure. "Much better," I murmured, and kissed her again. This time there was no pretense of it being a strategic move. She melted into the contact immediately, her hands sliding up to tangle in my hair, as she kissed me back with an intensity that made the financial reports scattered across the desk seem utterly unimportant. When we eventually broke apart again, she rested her forehead against mine, breathing hard. "The extraction reports," she said weakly, though she made no move to actually return to them. "Can wait," I finished, and kissed her once more for good measure. Rose sighed against my lips, finally admitting defeat. "You're going to be the death of my productivity." "I'll make it up to you," I promised, grinning at the way she tried to look annoyed despite the obvious contentment in her expression. "You'd better," she murmured, settling more comfortably against me. "Those profit margins don't calculate themselves." But neither of us made any move to return to the paperwork. Sometimes, after all, the best business decisions were the ones that had nothing to do with business at all. Chapter 647. Extraction 2. The financial reports lay forgotten on the desk as Rose and I lost ourselves in each other. What had started as teasing had evolved into something far more intense, our kisses becoming deeper, more urgent. Her hands had moved from my shoulders to tangle in my hair, while mine had found the small of her back, pulling her closer against me. "Arthur," she breathed against my lips, her voice carrying a note I rarely heard from the composed businesswoman. There was something vulnerable in the way she said my name, something that made my chest tighten with emotions I wasn't entirely ready to examine. I responded by trailing kisses along her jawline, enjoying the way she shivered at the contact. Her carefully styled auburn hair was becoming increasingly disheveled, and I found I preferred it this way, less perfect, more real, more her. "We should," she started to say, but the words dissolved into a soft gasp as I found that sensitive spot just below her ear. Her attempt at rational thought crumbled completely when I gently nipped at her earlobe. "Should what?" I murmured against her skin, my voice deliberately low and teasing. Should probably." Rose tried again, but her hands were doing the opposite of what her words suggested, sliding down to grip the front of my shirt as if anchoring herself to something solid in a world that had suddenly become unsteady. I pulled back just enough to look at her, taking in the sight of her flushed cheeks, her slightly swollen lips, the way her brown eyes had gone dark with something that had nothing to do with business calculations. Having trouble finishing that thought? She glared at me, though the effect was somewhat undermined by the fact that she was still pressed against me, still holding onto my shirt like a lifeline. You're insufferable when you're smug. I'm insufferable most of the time, I pointed out, leaning down to press a soft kiss to the corner of her mouth. You seem to like it anyway. I have terrible taste in men, she muttered, but she was already tilting her head to give me better access as I traced a path down her throat with lazy kisses. Terrible? I agreed against her skin, smiling at the way she arched slightly into the contact. Absolutely dreadful judgment. Her response was cut off when I found another particularly sensitive spot, replacing whatever she'd been about to say with a sound that was half sigh, half something much more interesting. Her fingers tightened in my hair, and I could feel some of the tension leaving her body as she finally stopped fighting the moment and just let herself feel. My hands had somehow found their way to the buttons of her blouse, though I didn't remember making the conscious decision to put them there. Rose didn't seem to mind. If anything, she pressed closer, her own fingers working at the collar of my shirt with a determination that suggested she'd abandoned any pretense of stopping this before it went too far. The rational part of my brain tried to point out that we were in the estate study, that anyone could walk in, that this was exactly the kind of complication Rose had been trying to avoid. But that voice was getting quieter by the moment, drowned out by the sound of Rose's breathing and the way she whispered my name when I did something she particularly enjoyed. I was just considering whether the desk could support both our weights when a knock at the door shattered the moment like glass. We both froze, Rose's hand still tangled in my shirt, mine still resting on the partially undone buttons of her blouse. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved, both hoping that whoever it was would simply go away and leave us to our increasingly compromising situation. Master! Rekha's voice came through the door, polite but persistent. Are you available? I have some questions about the extraction operations. Rose's eyes went wide with panic. In one fluid motion, she practically launched herself off my lap, landing on the couch across from the desk with a grace that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so obviously motivated by sheer terror at being caught in a compromising position. I took a moment to straighten my shirt and run a hand through my hair, trying to look like I hadn't just been in the middle of what could generously be called intimate business negotiations. Rose was frantically attempting to smooth down her hair and button her blouse, her movements quick and slightly panicked. Come in, I called, proud of how normal my voice sounded despite the fact that my heart was still racing for more than just the interrupted make-out session. The door opened, and Rekha stepped inside with her usual serene composure. She was wearing a simple black dress that somehow managed to look both elegant and practical. Her violet hair pulled back in a neat arrangement that made her look every inch the proper lady's companion she'd once pretended to be. But the moment she entered the room, her violet eyes took in the scene with the kind of analytical precision that missed nothing. Her gaze moved from me to Rose to the slightly scattered papers on the desk, and I could practically see her cataloging every detail. Rose's still flushed cheeks, my slightly mussed hair, the way we were sitting suspiciously far apart despite having been working together moments before. Oh, Rekha said, her voice carrying a note of polite curiosity that somehow managed to sound knowing. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Not at all, I said smoothly, gesturing to the papers on the desk as if they were the most fascinating things in the world. We were just reviewing the financial projections for the Ashen Territories extraction operation. Rose nodded a bit too enthusiastically. Yes, paperwork, she said, her voice coming out several octaves higher than normal. Just boring old paperwork. Numbers and profit margins and business things. The silence that followed was deafening. Rekha's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly, the only sign that she found Rose's explanation less than convincing. I, meanwhile, had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing at the sheer absurdity of Rose's attempt at casual deception. Paperwork, Rekha repeated, her tone perfectly neutral. How productive. Rose's face somehow managed to turn an even deeper shade of red. Very productive, she squeaked. Lots of productivity. I decided to take pity on her before she managed to dig herself any deeper. What questions did you have about the extraction operations? I asked Reka, successfully drawing attention away from Rose's increasingly creative destruction of the English language. Reka's attention shifted to me, though I caught the slight smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. I was wondering about the security arrangements for the extraction teams. Given the magical saturation in the area, standard protective measures might not be sufficient. It was a legitimate question, and one that required actual thought rather than the kind of distracted half-attention I'd been giving to business matters for the past hour. I settled back in my chair, grateful for the excuse to focus on something other than the way Rose was still trying to subtly fix her hair. "You're right to be concerned," I said, my mind shifting back into strategic mode. The deep dark saturation would be annoying to deal with. We could ask for the exosuits the Creighton family has. As we discussed the technical details of safely extracting valuable materials from a magically saturated environment, I couldn't help but notice the way Reka's eyes occasionally flicked between Rose and me. Rose, meanwhile, had gradually relaxed as the conversation moved away from whatever euphemisms she'd been trying to use for making out on the desk. She was back in her element now, discussing profit margins and operational logistics with the kind of focused competence that had made Vauquert one of the most successful companies in the empire. But I caught the way she occasionally glanced at me when she thought I wasn't looking, a lingering warmth in her brown eyes that suggested our productivity session hadn't been entirely forgotten. "I think we have enough information to begin preliminary planning," Reka said eventually, apparently satisfied with our discussion of security protocols and extraction timelines. "I'll coordinate with the advanced teams to ensure everything is properly prepared." She moved toward the door, then paused, turning back with that same barely there smile. "Oh, and Arthur? You might want to fix your collar. It's a bit disheveled." And with that devastating observation, she slipped out of the room, leaving Rose and me alone with the echo of her gentle amusement and the sudden realization that we'd been far less subtle than we'd thought. Rose buried her face in her hands with a groan. "She knows. She definitely knows," I agreed, reaching up to adjust my collar. "Though I have to say, your paperwork explanation was particularly convincing." "Shut up," Rose mumbled into her hands. "I panicked. I noticed," I said, grinning despite myself. "Very professional." I'm sure she believed every word. Rose peeked at me through her fingers, glaring with the kind of embarrassed indignation that only made her more endearing. "This is all your fault." "My fault," I protested. "You're the one who kissed me first. You're the one who made it impossible to concentrate on actual work. And you're the one who suggested we do paperwork while sitting in my lap," I pointed out reasonably. She groaned again, flopping back against the couch cushions. "We're never going to live this down." "Probably not," I agreed cheerfully. Though I have to say, as interrupted moments go, that was pretty spectacular. Rose buried her face in her hands again, the embarrassment clearly too much for her to handle. "I can't. I need to." She stood up abruptly, gathering the scattered papers in her arms with jerky, flustered movements. "I'm going to finish these reports in my room, where there are locks, and privacy, and no interruptions." She shot me one final glare that was equal parts mortification and accusation. "This is entirely your fault, Arthur Nightingale." And with that declaration, she hurried out of the study, clutching the financial documents to her chest like a shield against further embarrassment. The door clicked shut behind her with perhaps more force than strictly necessary. I couldn't help myself. I started laughing. The entire situation was too absurd, from Rose's panicked leap to the couch to her high-pitched paperwork explanation to her dramatic exit. The mental image of her trying to explain productivity while looking like she'd just been thoroughly kissed was going to amuse me for weeks. My laughter was still echoing in the study when I heard the door open again. I expected Rose to storm back in with some cutting remark about my amusement at her expense. But instead, Reka slipped quietly back into the room. "Master," she said softly, her violet flower eyes meeting mine with that serene composure she wore like armor. But there was something else in her expression. something warmer, more personal than her usual professional demeanor. "Reka?" I said, my laughter fading as I took in her presence. She moved with that peculiar grace she'd always possessed, each step deliberate and fluid. "Did you forget something?" Instead of answering immediately, she approached my chair with measured steps. There was something different about her posture now, something that made me pay closer attention. The elevation to mid-ascendant rank had changed her in subtle ways. There was an otherworldly quality to her movements now, a sense of existing slightly apart from normal reality. "I wanted to speak with you privately," Reka said, her voice carrying those new harmonics that had developed after her power increase. Before I could ask what she meant, Reka knelt down beside my chair and gently placed her head in my lap. "Master," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of contentment that made my chest tighten. "I've been good, haven't I? Don't I deserve a reward?" Chapter 648. Extraction 3. The warmth of Master's lap beneath my cheek was exactly as I remembered it. Comforting, safe, home. I closed my eyes and allowed myself this moment of perfect contentment, my violet hair spilling across his knees like moonlight. The familiar scent of him, that unique combination of strength and gentleness that was purely Arthur Nightingale, filled my senses and made my chest tight with emotions I'd been carrying for so long. "I've been good, haven't I?" The words had slipped out so naturally, so easily. Just like before, when I'd knelt beside his chair in this very study and made what I'd thought was such a selfish, embarrassing request. I remembered how my heart had hammered in my chest that day, how I'd been certain he would refuse, push me away, remind me of my place. Instead, he'd surprised me. He'd known. Somehow, my wonderful, perceptive master had understood exactly what I needed before I'd even finished asking. His hand had found my hair, fingers threading through the violet strands with such gentle care that I'd nearly wept from the simple joy of it. The way he'd petted me, stroked my hair while I knelt beside him. It had been everything I dreamed of and more. That memory made warmth bloom in my chest even now. He called my request honest back then. Said there was nothing wrong with wanting comfort, with seeking the touch of someone who cared about me. But what I wanted now, what I truly wanted to ask for, that was so much more complicated. His heart. The thought whispered through my mind like a prayer and a curse combined. That was what I really wanted, wasn't it? Not just these stolen moments of affection, not just the privilege of kneeling at his side. I wanted his love. I wanted to mean to him what he meant to me, everything. But how could I ask for something so impossible? I thought of the others, the ones who already held pieces of his attention. Princess Cecilia Slatemark, with her brilliant tactical mind and powerful chaotic magic. Princess Seraphina Zenith, genius swordswoman. Princess Rachel Creighton, radiant and the future saintess. And Rose Springshaper, the Marquis's daughter whose business acumen and fierce independence had earned his respect in ways I could only dream of. For remarkable women, for who belonged in his world of politics and power, who could stand beside him as equals. What was I compared to them? A weapon. That's all I'd ever been, all I'd ever been trained to be. And not even a particularly impressive weapon anymore. My master was far above me in strength. The elevation to mid-ascendant rank had changed me, yes, made me stronger, more capable. But it hadn't changed the fundamental truth of what I was. I was good at killing things, at following orders, at serving without question. I wasn't a princess born to rule, or a brilliant businesswoman who could navigate the complexities of empire building. I was just Reka, the assassin who'd been lucky enough to find redemption in Arthur's service. He deserves better than someone who can only offer devotion, I thought, even as I treasured the feeling of being close to him. He deserves someone who can challenge him, inspire him, stand as his equal rather than kneeling at his feet. The rational part of my mind knew this, accepted it even. I should be grateful for what I had, his trust, his care, his protection. I should content myself with these moments and ask for nothing more. Perhaps I could request another head pat, or permission to sleep in his room when nightmares plagued me. Simple things, safe things. I opened my mouth to voice some lesser request, to ask for something appropriately modest for someone in my position. But before I could speak, Master's hand found my chin, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. "Reka," he said softly, and there was something in his voice that made my heart skip. "Tell me what you really want." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared up at him, silver eyes wide with surprise and something very close to panic. How did he always know? How did he always see straight through to the heart of things I tried so desperately to hide? "Master, I started, then stopped, my courage failing me. "I don't know what you mean." His blue eyes were steady on mine, patient but unyielding. "Yes, you do. And I think we both know it's not another head pat you're hoping for." Heat flooded my cheeks. Of course he knew. This was Arthur Nightingale, the man who'd seen through my disguise as a lady's companion, who'd unraveled my carefully constructed lies with nothing but observation and intuition. Did I really think I could hide the depth of my feelings from him? I can't," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It's not. I shouldn't. Reka." His hand moved from my chin to cup my cheek, thumb brushing across my skin with heartbreaking gentleness. "Tell me." The simple command, spoken with such quiet authority, nearly broke my resolve entirely. But the practical part of my mind rallied, throwing up every defense I'd carefully constructed. "Master, you have 4 incredible women who care for you," I said quickly, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Princesses who can stand beside you as equals, who can help you build anything. And Rose, brilliant and capable and perfect for you in every way. What could I possibly offer that they can't?" "You're just what?" he interrupted, and there was an edge to his voice now that made me fall silent. "Just someone who's been by my side through everything? Just someone who's shown me loyalty and devotion that never wavers? Just someone whose happiness matters to me more than you seem to think it should?" I blinked up at him, stunned by the intensity in his expression. "Master, I know what you want to ask me, Reka," he said softly, "and I want you to know that whatever you're afraid of, whatever you think disqualifies you from deserving happiness, you're wrong." The certainty in his voice made something crack open in my chest. All the careful walls I'd built, all the rational arguments about my place and worth, suddenly felt fragile as spun glass. "I know you're afraid," he continued, his thumb still tracing gentle patterns on my cheek. "But I'm asking you to be brave for me, just this once. Tell me what you really want." The silence stretched between us, heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. I could feel my carefully constructed restraint crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of his patient attention. "Your heart?" I whispered finally, the words so quiet I wasn't sure he'd heard them. "I want your heart, Master. I want to love you the way I've always loved you. But more. I want to be more than just your weapon, more than just someone who kneels at your feet. My voice broke slightly. "I want to matter to you the way you matter to me." The confession hung in the air between us like something fragile and precious. I kept my eyes fixed on his face, searching desperately for some sign of his reaction, terrified of what I might see there. What I saw was a smile, slow, warm, and so full of affection that it took my breath away. "Reka," he said, his voice soft with something that sounded remarkably like wonder. "You beautiful, impossible woman. Did you really think I didn't know? Did you think I couldn't see how much you mean to me?" Before I could process his words fully, his hand was threading through my hair, tilting my head up as he leaned down. His lips met mine in a kiss that was everything I dreamed of and nothing I dared hope for. Gentle at first, almost questioning, then deeper as I responded with all the desperate love I'd been holding back for so long. When we finally broke apart, I was dizzy with joy and disbelief and a happiness so intense it felt like it might consume me entirely. "I love you too," he murmured against my lips, and I thought my heart might actually stop. "I have for longer than you know." I laughed then, or maybe sobbed. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. All I knew was that Arthur Nightingale, my master, my everything, loved me back. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly worthy of standing in his light. Chapter 649. Extraction. 4. It was a very heartwarming moment. And cute too. Reika had become a bit guarded and serious over the months, so to see she had such an adorable side was refreshing. Her kissing style was endearingly innocent, her lips eagerly seeking out mine as she trembled from every touch, like she couldn't quite believe this was really happening. Finally, we stopped kissing and our eyes met. Her eyes were always so dazzling, in the shape of violet flowers that took my breath away. Those unique irises seemed to shimmer with emotions she was still learning how to express. Master, I have something to do," Reika stammered. Her face flushed the most beautiful shade of pink I'd ever seen. She scrambled out of the room with such haste that she nearly tripped over her own feet, and I had to hold back a laugh at how utterly adorable she was being. "Wife number 5 captured," Luna commented in my mind with what I could only describe as smug satisfaction, making me cough into my fist. "Things happen?" I muttered under my breath, trying to ignore the knowing amusement radiating from my bond with the Qilin. Luna said, and I could practically hear her rolling her eyes. "I suppose for someone like you, getting 5 wives is just natural, huh? What's next? Are you going to accidentally seduce the Empress herself?" I ignored the increasingly sarcastic Qilin in my head as I exhaled slowly. That was the easy part, I realized. I liked Reika and she liked me. The confession had been beautiful, natural, right? Now came the hard part, telling the 4 other girls. I hoped it wouldn't be too difficult to explain. After all, they'd been understanding about sharing my attention so far. Surely adding one more person to the mix wouldn't cause too much drama. Of course, as they say, hopes do a wonderful little thing. They meet reality with all the subtlety of a runaway carriage. "Arthur," Rachel said slowly, her voice carrying that dangerous edge that immediately put me on high alert. "Please, could you repeat that for me once more?" I was currently in the estate's sitting room with Rachel and Callie. Reika and Rose had departed for the Ashen territories that morning to oversee the extraction process with the employees from both Ouroboros and Vakert who had traveled all the way here, which left me alone to face this particular conversation. Why was Callie here, you might ask? Simple strategy. I needed a human shield, and what better option than a zombie princess who was technically already dead and therefore theoretically harder to kill again. Callie, for her part, seemed to be enjoying the show immensely. She was lounging in an armchair with the kind of relaxed posture that suggested she was settling in for quality entertainment. Her dark eyes glittered with barely contained mirth as she watched the proceedings unfold. "I like Reika," I said to Rachel, trying to keep my voice steady and confident. "I want to date her." Rachel blinked once, twice, then slowly she smiled. It was a brilliant smile, worthy of the future saintess she was destined to become. Radiant, beautiful, absolutely breathtaking. Of course, that assessment only held true if you focused solely on her lips. When you looked at her eyes, well, that was an entirely different story. Rachel hummed thoughtfully, the sound carrying dangerous undertones. Then, in that voice that usually made my heart race for entirely different reasons, she called my name, Arthur. Usually, her sensual, light, silky voice would send pleasant shivers down my spine when she said my name. Oh, I did get shivers down my spine this time, just for an entirely different and significantly more concerning reason. "You see," Rachel said as she rose gracefully from her seat, clapping her hands together with the kind of deliberate cheerfulness that immediately set off every alarm bell in my head. "I was actually preparing something very cute for you." She pulled out her phone with a flourish, her smile growing wider by the second. "Could you help me choose the design? Is it a dress?" I wondered hopefully. Maybe she was planning some kind of romantic outfit for our next date. That would be nice and normal and not at all threatening to my continued well-being. Then my eyes focused on her phone screen, and I froze completely. I said carefully, my voice suddenly much higher than usual. "Is that a cage for your phoenix?" The image on her screen was indeed a cage. Golden, ornate, beautifully crafted, and decidedly human-sized. "Oh no," Rachel said with an innocent tilt of her head that fooled absolutely no one in the room. "My Aurelius is a free spirit. He would never tolerate being caged." My eyes wandered slightly from her phone, and I noticed she was holding something else in her other hand. Something that looked suspiciously like a set of golden shackles. For the sake of my sanity and continued mental health, I decided to ignore that particular detail entirely. I did not see that, I thought desperately. You absolutely did, Luna commented with unhelpful glee. And might I add, those look like they're inscribed with some very interesting runes. Binding runes, if I'm not mistaken. It's for you, Rachel said sweetly, her smile growing wider as the golden flecks in her brown eyes increased in luminosity. After all, a man like you should be properly secured, don't you think? It's only fair. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Callie had stopped lounging and was now sitting forward with obvious interest, clearly deciding that this conversation had taken a turn worth paying attention to. Rachel, I said slowly, trying to project calm reasoning while internally panicking. I understand you might be concerned about the situation, but I think we should talk about this rationally. Oh, I'm being perfectly rational, Rachel replied, her voice maintaining that dangerous sweetness. I've done extensive research into the most effective methods of ensuring loyalty and preventing wandering. She tapped her phone screen, and I really didn't want to know what other images she had saved there. The cage is spacious, she continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Comfortable bedding, proper ventilation, regular feeding times. I think you'd find it quite accommodating. Callie made a choking sound that might have been suppressed laughter. When I shot her a desperate look for support, she just shrugged and mouthed good luck with obvious amusement. Rachel, I tried again. You know I care about you. Adding Reka to our arrangement doesn't change how I feel about you. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across her features. The dangerous smile softened slightly, and I caught a glimpse of the uncertainty she was hiding beneath all the threatening jokes. I know, she said quietly, her voice losing some of its edge. I know you care about all of us. It's just... She gestured helplessly with her phone. It's getting a bit crowded, don't you think? 5 of us now. Sometimes I wonder if there's enough of you to go around. The honest admission hit me harder than all her teasing threats combined. I stood up and crossed to her, gently taking the phone from her hands and setting it aside. Then I cupped her face in my palms, forcing her to meet my eyes. Rachel, I said seriously, you're not interchangeable to me. None of you are. What I feel for you is unique, special. It doesn't get diminished just because I care about others too. She searched my face for a long moment, those beautiful brown eyes studying me intently. Then, slowly, the tension began to leave her shoulders. You're sure? She asked softly. You're sure you won't get tired of dealing with all of us? We can be quite a handful. I couldn't help but smile at that. Trust me, I've noticed. And no, I won't get tired of you. Any of you. Rachel sighed, a sound that was half exasperation and half fondness. Fine, she said, though her lips were already curving into a more genuine smile. I suppose if it makes you happy, then I'm happy too. Even if it is terribly unfair that you get to collect beautiful women like some kind of romantic trophy case while we have to share. I hardly think it's that simple, I protested, but she was already rising on her tiptoes to silence me with a kiss. This kiss was different from the one I'd shared with Reka, where hers had been sweet and tentative. Rachel's was confident and demanding. She kissed like she did everything else, with passion and determination and just a hint of possessiveness that made my heart race. Her arms wound around my neck, pulling me closer as she deepened the kiss. I responded instinctively, my hands finding her waist and drawing her against me. The taste of her, the warmth of her body pressed against mine. It was intoxicating in a way that made me forget everything else. Ahem. The pointed cough from across the room made us both freeze. Slowly, reluctantly, we broke apart and turned to find Callie watching us with raised eyebrows and an expression of exaggerated patience. Did you two forget I was still in the room? She asked dryly. Because while I'm sure this is very romantic for you, it's getting a bit awkward for the audience. Rachel's face flushed bright red, the confident seductress for moments before replaced by a mortified young woman who'd just been caught making out in front of company. She buried her face against my shoulder with a muffled groan of embarrassment. "Callie," I said firmly, "don't you have somewhere else to be?" The zombie princess grinned, clearly enjoying our discomfort. "Not particularly. This is much more entertaining than anything else happening around here. Go find something to do," I ordered, making shooing motions with my free hand while keeping the other arm protectively around Rachel's still blushing form. Callie clicked her tongue in disappointment but rose from her chair with exaggerated reluctance. Fine. But you owe me for this interruption. I was just getting to the good part." She sauntered toward the door, pausing just long enough to add, "Try to keep it down, would you? Some of us are trying to maintain our dignity around here." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Rachel and me alone once more. The moments stretched between us, charged with possibility and the lingering heat of our interrupted kiss. "Now, where were we?" I murmured, tilting Rachel's chin up to meet my eyes. Her embarrassment was already fading, replaced by something warmer and more inviting. "I believe you were in the process of making it up to me for adding another girl to your collection," she said with a smile that was pure trouble. I was just leaning down to resume our kiss when a voice echoed through the estate with enough force to rattle the windows. Arthur Nightingale. Chapter 650. Extraction. 5. The sitting room door burst open with enough force to make both Rachel and me jump apart. Our romantic moment shattered like glass against stone. Rose Springshaper stood in the doorway, her auburn hair slightly disheveled from what must have been a very hasty return journey from the Ashen Territories. Her brown eyes blazed with an anger I'd rarely seen from the usually composed businesswoman. "Arthur Nightingale," she said again, her voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that was somehow more intimidating than Rachel's earlier threats. "We need to talk. Now." Rachel instinctively moved closer to me, her hand finding my arm in a gesture that was part protective, part possessive. "Rose, what's wrong? Did something happen at the extraction site?" Rose's gaze flicked to Rachel, then back to me, and I could see her taking in our slightly mussed appearances, the way we were standing close together, the lingering tension in the air that spoke of interrupted intimacy. "Oh, the extraction is going perfectly fine," Rose said with the kind of sharp smile that made me wince. "The equipment is working beautifully, the teams are efficient, and the profit margins are exceeding all projections. No, my issue isn't with business, Arthur. My issue is with the fact that I had to learn about your new romantic entanglement from Reka herself." I felt my stomach drop. "Rose, I can explain." "Can you?" she interrupted, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind her with deliberate care. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you made a rather significant decision about our arrangement without bothering to inform the people it affects." Rachel shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Rose, it's not like that. Arthur was just telling me." "After the fact," Rose pointed out, her attention laser-focused on me. "Weren't you, Arthur? You confessed to Reka, accepted her confession, and then came to tell us about it afterward." The accusation hung in the air, and I realized she was absolutely right. In my excitement about Reka's confession, in the warmth and joy of that moment, I'd acted first and thought about the consequences later. I'd made a decision that affected all of us without consulting anyone. "You're right," I said quietly, and Rose's eyebrows rose slightly at my immediate admission. "I should have talked to all of you first. I should have been more considerate of everyone's feelings." "Yes, you should have," Rose agreed, though some of the fire was already leaving her voice. "Arthur, I don't have a problem with you caring about Reka. She's wonderful, and honestly, anyone with eyes could see how she feels about you. But the way you handled it." She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of frustration I recognized from our business meetings when particularly obtuse clients tested her patience. "We're not just your romantic interests, Arthur," she continued, her voice softer now but no less serious. "We're partners in this. Whatever this is, we're building together. When you make unilateral decisions about our relationships, it makes us feel like we don't have a voice in our own lives." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. She was absolutely right, And the worst part was that I should have known better. Rose, Rachel, Cecilia, Serafina, they were all strong, independent women who deserved to be treated as equals, not just informed of decisions after they'd already been made. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it completely. "You're absolutely right. I got caught up in the moment and forgot that this affects all of us. It won't happen again." Rose studied my face for a long moment, searching for sincerity. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because her rigid posture began to relax. "Good," she said with a nod. "Because honestly, Arthur, adding Rekha to our little group makes perfect sense. She's been part of your inner circle and she clearly adores you. I'd have to be blind not to see how happy you make each other." Rachel looked between us with something like amazement. "Wait, that's it? You're not going to threaten him with financial ruin or demand he sign a contract promising equal time distribution?" Rose looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Why would I do that? Arthur made a mistake in how he handled the situation. He acknowledged it and apologized, and he's promised to do better. What more is there to discuss?" "I showed him pictures of cages," Rachel admitted with a blush. "You did what?" Rose stared at her in disbelief. "Rachel, please tell me you weren't seriously considering actually caging him." "It was just a joke," Rachel protested, though her blush deepened. "Mostly. I mean, the research was real, but I wasn't actually going to." She trailed off under Rose's incredulous stare, and I couldn't help but smile at the interaction. Leave it to Rose to make Rachel's earlier threats seem completely absurd just by treating them as such. "You two are ridiculous," Rose said, but there was fondness in her voice now. "Arthur, next time you want to add someone to our relationship, just talk to us first. We're reasonable people, well, most of us are reasonable," she added with a pointed look at Rachel. "I will," I promised. "And Rose, thank you for being understanding about this." She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since she'd stormed into the room. "Arthur, I care about you. All I want is to be treated like a partner, not just someone to be informed of your decisions after the fact. As long as you can manage that, I think we'll be just fine." The tension in the room finally began to dissipate, and I felt myself relaxing for the first time since Rose had burst through the door. Crisis averted, lesson learned, and everyone was on the same page. This was going much better than I'd dared to hope. "Now then," Rose continued, settling into one of the chairs with the air of someone ready to move on to other matters. "We should probably discuss how to tell Cecilia and Serafina. They're going to want to know, and I'd rather they hear it from us than through gossip." "Agreed," I said, already dreading those conversations. If Rachel's reaction had been threatening and Rose's had been reasonably angry, I could only imagine what the princesses might say. Before we could begin planning that particular diplomatic nightmare, however, a knock at the door interrupted us. The sound was polite but firm, carrying an undertone of urgency that immediately put me on alert. "Come in," I called. The door opened to reveal Marcus, one of the estate's senior staff members, looking slightly out of breath as if he'd been hurrying. "Master Arthur," he said with a bow. "Forgive the interruption, but you have a visitor. His Majesty is here and requests an immediate audience with you. He says it's a matter of some urgency." I felt Rachel tense beside me at the mention of her father. Alastor Creighton, the king of the northern continent, was not the type of man to make casual social calls. If he was here, and if he was requesting an immediate audience, then something significant was happening. "Did he say what this was about?" I asked, though I suspected Marcus wouldn't have much additional information. "No, sir. He simply said that time was of the essence and that you would understand the importance once you spoke with him." I exchanged glances with Rachel, who looked as puzzled as I felt. Her relationship with her father was complicated at best, and his sudden appearance at my estate was definitely unexpected. "Very well," I said, standing and straightening my clothes. "Tell His Majesty I'll be with him shortly." Marcus bowed again and departed, leaving the three of us alone with a new tension in the air. Chapter 651. An Overdue Reward. I made my way through the estate's corridors toward the grand reception hall, my mind racing through possible reasons for Alastor's sudden visit. While the king of the northern continent dropping by unannounced was unusual, it wasn't entirely unprecedented. Alastor had always been more of a mentor and father figure to me than just Rachel's father, especially after everything we'd been through together. Still, the request for an immediate audience suggested this wasn't just a social call. When I entered the hall, I found Alastor standing near the massive windows overlooking the estate grounds, his hands clasped behind his back. Even in casual moments like this, he carried himself with the natural authority of someone born to rule. His silver hair caught the afternoon light, and when he turned at my approach, those familiar deep blue eyes, so like Rachel's yet somehow more weathered by years of kingship, lit up with genuine pleasure. "Arthur," he said warmly, crossing the room to clasp my shoulder in the kind of greeting reserved for family. "Look at you, getting taller every time I see you. Pretty soon you'll be looking down at this old king." I grinned, the familiar banter immediately putting me at ease. "I think we both know you stopped being old the day you decided to stay in fighting shape, Alastor." He gestured toward a pair of comfortable chairs arranged near the windows. "Come sit. I have something long overdue to discuss with you." We settled into the chairs, and I waited patiently. I'd learned over the years that when Alastor had something important to say, it was best to let him get there in his own time. "Tell me," he began, leaning back in his chair, "do you remember what I promised if you managed to beat Lucifer at the Sovereign's tournament? You remember what I offered you?" "You offered an ancient-grade artifact as the staff of my lich," I said, recalling that particular conversation. "However, I got another staff before since I wanted to make my lich before the tournament." "You did," Alastor confirmed. "You were always so ambitious after all. However, that doesn't mean I can't give you a reward regardless." He stood and moved toward a large, ornately carved case I'd noticed but hadn't really focused on. It bore the royal seal of the Creighton family and looked like it contained something significant. "But," he continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "I realized recently that I never properly rewarded you for what you did. For my family. For Rachel." "Alastor," I said carefully, "you don't owe me anything. What I did because it was right. Not because I expected. Because you expected nothing." He interrupted, turning back to face me with an expression that was part pride, part exasperation. "That's exactly why you deserve everything." He opened the case with reverent hands, and I felt my breath catch at what was revealed inside. The most magnificent piece of armor I had ever seen lay nestled in custom-fitted padding. It wasn't traditional plate mail or even the advanced magical gear I was familiar with. This was something else entirely, sleek and form-fitting, with lines that seemed to flow like water while suggesting incredible strength. The surface had an almost organic quality, as if it were alive and waiting. "An ancient-grade artifact exosuit," Alastor announced, his voice filled with unmistakable pride. "Commissioned specifically for you. It took an ancient-grade armor artifact at its base, and I modified it for you." I stared at the armor, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Ancient-grade artifacts were incredible. I had 2 of them, but this was more than that. Customized. "Alastor," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I commissioned it 3 months after you beat Lucifer," he admitted, moving to stand beside the case. "It's taken nearly 3 years to complete. The base artifact is called Mithrite." He gestured toward the exosuit with obvious pride. "The magical circuits are powered by a core containing crystallized starlight and contain enchantments for enhanced strength, speed, magical resistance, and autonomous repair capabilities. The neural interface will bond with your magical signature and respond to your thoughts as naturally as your own reflexes." My mind reeled as I tried to process the implications of what he was describing. The resources, time, and expertise required for such a project would be staggering, even for a king. "But why now?" I asked, looking up at him. "You've had this for months. Why choose today to give it to me?" Alastor's expression grew knowing, and I caught a glimmer of the same mischievous intelligence that Rachel had inherited. "Because, my dear boy, you're about to need it more than ever." "What do you mean?" "Arthur," he said, settling back into his chair. You've just added a fifth young woman to your rather impressive collection of romantic interests. You're connected to royal families across multiple continents. You're building something significant, something that's going to reshape the political landscape whether you intend to or not. His expression grew more serious. And that means you're going to acquire enemies, powerful ones, people who will see you as a threat to the established order, or who will want to use you for their own purposes. The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy cloak. I'd been so focused on managing my personal relationships that I hadn't fully considered the broader political implications of my situation. The armor isn't just protection, Arthur, Alastor continued. It's a statement, a declaration that you have allies who believe in you and are willing to invest in your future. It will grow with you as your power develops, adapting and enhancing your abilities as needed. I stood and approached the case, my hands hovering over the armor without quite touching it. Up close, I could see the incredible detail work, the way the magical circuits seemed to pulse with their own inner light. I don't know what to say, I admitted. Say you'll accept it, Alastor said simply. Say you'll use it to protect yourself and the people you care about. Say you'll remember that no matter how powerful you become, you'll always have a home in the northern continent. I looked at this man who had been mentor, ally, and father figure all rolled into one, and felt my throat tighten with emotion. Thank you, I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. For everything, not just the armor, but for believing in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. Alastor's smile was radiant. That's what family does, Arthur. His lips continued to smile, but his eyes changed as shivers went down my spine. Now then, Alastor said, his voice maintaining that same casual conversational tone. Shall we talk about why my lovely daughter was searching for people to make cages? Chapter 652. A Father's Lesson 1. Alastor's smile remained warm and paternal as he gazed at Arthur, the young man he'd come to regard as a son. But then, as if a switch had been flipped somewhere deep in his mind, something shifted in his expression. The warmth didn't disappear entirely, but it took on a different quality, like sunlight glinting off the edge of a blade. Now then, Alastor said, his voice maintaining that same casual conversational tone. Shall we talk about why my lovely daughter was searching for people to make cages? The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Alastor's lips curved into what could generously be called a smile, but his deep blue eyes were far, far from smiling. They held the kind of cold, calculating intensity that had made him one of the most feared rulers in the world, the look that reminded anyone who saw it exactly why the Creighton family had never fallen to outside threats during his reign. Arthur shuddered involuntarily at the sight, a single thought flashing through his mind. Like father, like daughter. Alastor. Arthur began carefully, his voice slightly higher than usual. I can explain. Oh, I'm certain you can. Alastor interrupted, still using that terrifyingly pleasant tone. Because you see, Arthur, when reports reached me that my pure, lovely daughter, the future saintess of the world, mind you, was making inquiries about custom cage construction, I was naturally concerned. He stood slowly, each movement deliberate and controlled, like a predator rising to its full height. Arthur found himself taking an unconscious step backward. At first, Alastor continued, beginning to pace with the fluid grace of someone who had spent decades moving through political minefields, I thought perhaps it was for her phoenix. Aurelius can be quite spirited, after all, and Rachel has always been thorough in her preparations. Arthur's mouth went dry as dust. But then, Alastor's voice dropped to a dangerous rumble. I learned about the specifications she was requesting. Human-sized, Arthur. Specifically designed for a young man of your exact measurements. With reinforced restraints and anti-magic wards. Alastor wasn't faking his anger. This was genuine paternal fury mixed with the cold calculation of a king who had just learned that his precious daughter was developing problematic tendencies. The realization that Rachel, his pure, lovely daughter who was destined to become the future saintess, had been researching methods of imprisonment was genuinely horrifying to him, especially because it wasn't for her phoenix. A divine beast like Aurelius didn't need to be caged, and more importantly, shouldn't be caged. No, these specifications had been for Arthur. And Rachel definitely had those tendencies. All because of Arthur Nightingale. Of course, Alastor wasn't stupid enough to actually kill the young man. His daughter would never forgive him if he did that. And besides, Arthur was far too important to the world's future to eliminate over personal grievances. The boy had already proven instrumental in preventing one apocalyptic scenario, and given the way fate seemed to swirl around him, he'd likely be crucial in preventing several more. But teaching him a lesson? Well, that couldn't hurt. In fact, it was probably overdue. Bond with the artifact, Alastor said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding tone that brooked no argument. Then we should train together. I want to see exactly how far you've come. Arthur looked between Alastor's dangerous expression and the magnificent exosuit lying in its case, clearly recognizing that this had just shifted from a gift-giving ceremony to something far more ominous. Right now? Arthur asked, though he was already moving toward the case. Right now, Alastor confirmed, his smile taking on a distinctly predatory quality. After all, what good is ancient-grade armor if you don't know how to use it properly? Arthur approached the exosuit with a mixture of reverence and growing trepidation. Even setting aside Alastor's current mood, bonding with an ancient-grade artifact was serious business. These weren't simple magical items that anyone could pick up and use. They required a deep connection between the artifact and its wielder, a melding of magical signatures that could take hours or even days to achieve properly. He placed his hands on the armor's surface, feeling the cool smoothness of the mithril alloy beneath his palms. The moment his skin made contact, something extraordinary happened. The armor responded instantly. Magical circuits that had been dormant suddenly blazed to life, running through the material like veins of liquid starlight. The exosuit's surface rippled and flowed, reshaping itself to perfectly match Arthur's proportions. The neural interface activated with a gentle hum, and Arthur felt the artifact's consciousness brush against his own. Not invasive, but welcoming, like greeting an old friend. Within moments, the bonding process was complete. The armor had accepted him as readily as if it had been waiting for him specifically, which Arthur realized with a start it probably had been. Alastor watched this display with a mixture of satisfaction and resignation. He'd expected this, of course. Arthur's talent was extraordinary. Still, seeing an ancient-grade artifact accept someone so readily was always impressive, even when you were expecting it. Excellent, Alastor said, though his tone suggested this was anything but excellent for Arthur's immediate future. The armor recognizes you as its rightful wielder. Now, shall we see how well you can use it? Arthur looked down at himself, marveling at how natural the exosuit felt. It was like wearing a second skin. He could barely tell he had it on, yet he could sense the incredible power thrumming just beneath the surface. I suppose I don't have much choice in the matter, Arthur said, recognizing the futility of trying to talk his way out of whatever Alastor had planned. No, Alastor agreed cheerfully. You really don't. Come along then. They made their way through the estate toward the training grounds, Alastor maintaining that same unsettling combination of paternal warmth and barely contained menace. Arthur found himself desperately trying to think of ways to explain Rachel's behavior that might mollify an angry father, but kept coming up short. How exactly do you tell a king that his daughter has Yandere tendencies without making the situation worse? The training grounds came into view, a large, open area surrounded by protective barriers and equipped with various practice dummies, target ranges, and sparring circles. It was designed to handle serious magical combat, which Arthur was beginning to suspect he was going to need. You know, Alastor said conversationally as they entered the training area, I've been curious about your development ever since the Lucifer incident. Reports of your capabilities have been impressive. He began removing his outer jacket with careful, deliberate movements. But reports can be misleading. Sometimes a father simply needs to see things for himself. Arthur watched with growing alarm as Alastor's magical aura began to manifest around him. Not the overwhelming presence of someone trying to intimidate, but the controlled, focused energy of a master preparing for serious combat. Alastor, Arthur tried one more time. About Rachel and the cages. Oh, we'll discuss that afterwards, Alastor said with a smile that was all teeth. Assuming you're still conscious, of course. The king of the northern continent held his hands behind his back, his silver hair catching the afternoon light as his deep blue eyes fixed on Arthur with the intensity of a hunting falcon. Now then, my boy, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered nations and faced down legendary monsters. Show me what you've learned. Arthur looked at the man who had been a mentor and father figure, now preparing to beat several kinds of sense into him, and sighed deeply. This is what I get for dating a Yandra princess. He activated the exosuit's combat systems and prepared himself for what was undoubtedly going to be a very educational afternoon. Chapter 653. A Father's Lesson 2. Arthur didn't bother with pretense or warming up. He understood exactly what kind of test this was, and half measures would only result in a more thorough beating. His sword materialized in his hand as he shot upward in a burst of movement, astral energy immediately coating the blade in a brilliant azure sheath. Grade 5 Art. Tempest Dance Technique. His blade began to move in the distinctive flowing patterns of the Tempest Dance, each stroke building upon the previous one as astral energy accumulated around the weapon like a gathering storm. Alastor watched with the patient attention of someone observing a particularly interesting experiment. He didn't move, didn't even shift his stance. He simply raised his left hand slightly, and the mana in front of him condensed into an invisible barrier. Arthur's astral blade, carrying enough force to cleave through reinforced steel, met that barrier and stopped dead. The impact sent shockwaves through the training ground, but Alastor's expression didn't even flicker. This is the power of a radiant rancor, Arthur thought grimly as he felt the overwhelming resistance against his weapon. The ability to stop an astral blade with nothing but concentrated will. He didn't let the disappointment slow him down. Instead, Arthur used his gravity magic to maintain perfect balance as he continued the Tempest Dance technique, pouring more astral energy into each successive movement. The technique had 7 distinct forms, and Arthur had achieved Zenith Realm mastery in all of them. A level of proficiency that allowed for combinations and transitions that lesser practitioners could never attempt. The astral energy around his blade continued to balloon outward, growing denser and more volatile with each passing second. The air itself began to thrum with barely contained power as Arthur reached the crescendo of the Grade 5 art. Then, without warning, he shifted. The flowing movements of Tempest Dance suddenly crystallized into something entirely different. Sharper, more focused, infinitely more dangerous. Arthur's astral energy didn't dissipate. Instead, it compressed and layered, forming 2 distinct sheaths around his blade. Between those layers, spots of pure, deep dark energy flickered like dying stars. Second movement of Grade 6 art, Hollow Eclipse. The technique was a seamless evolution from Tempest Dance, something only possible with the Zenith Realm mastery Arthur had achieved. The combination of Grade 5 and Grade 6 arts should have been impossible for someone of his rank, but Arthur had never been bound by conventional limitations. His blade descended toward Alastor with enough force to split mountains. "Ho!" Alastor said, his voice carrying a note of genuine interest. He extended his right hand this time, and 8 perfect circles of magical formulae appeared in the air before him. The construct was beautiful in its complexity, a work of art that demonstrated the kind of magical mastery that came only from decades of study and practice. The 8-circle spell met Arthur's Hollow Eclipse head-on and completely dismantled it. The layered astral energy dispersed like morning mist. The deep dark fragments scattered harmlessly, and Arthur found himself pushed backward by a wall of pure magical force. "You've gotten strong," Alastor said simply, though his plain words concealed genuine astonishment. A 9-circle mage, one of 4 individuals to achieve that level in the world, had been forced to raise his hand against a mid-ascendant rancor. Arthur's talent was beyond exceptional. It was approaching the realm of the miraculous. Arthur gritted his teeth as he fought against the pressure of Alastor's mana, his feet skidding across the training ground's reinforced surface. But instead of retreating further, he planted himself firmly and began weaving spell formulae with both hands. 3 7-circle spells. Simultaneously, Alastor's eyes widened in shock as he observed the casting process. This wasn't the traditional Asterius method of spell construction that had dominated magical theory for centuries. The formulae were being built using an entirely different framework, one that was not only unfamiliar but demonstrably superior in its efficiency and power output. The first spell was a massive force projection, designed to overwhelm defenses through sheer kinetic energy. The second was a space distortion effect that would make dodging nearly impossible. The third was a binding spell that would activate the moment the target tried to counterattack. It was a combination that should have required 3 separate mages to execute properly, and Arthur was managing it alone with a casting speed that defied conventional understanding. Alastor's grin widened as he unraveled the mana structure around all 3 spells and dismantled them with casual efficiency. Incredible. The boy isn't just powerful. He's revolutionizing magical theory in real time. But Arthur wasn't finished. Even as his spells dissolved, he was already moving, cutting the distance between them with a burst of enhanced speed. His sword gleamed with a new kind of energy. Not the dark astral power he'd been using, but something infinitely brighter. Pure light, the opposing force to deep dark, equally rare and infinitely more difficult to control. First movement of Grade 6 art, God Flash. The technique lived up to its name. Arthur's blade moved faster than thought, leaving a trail of brilliant white light that seared afterimages into the air. It was an attack designed to be unavoidable, to strike faster than opponents could react. Alastor blocked it anyway. His hand moved with the kind of supernatural precision that came from decades of combat experience, intercepting Arthur's blade at exactly the right angle to deflect rather than absorb the full impact. Sparks of pure light scattered across the training ground like fallen stars. Not bad at all," Alastor murmured, his grin widening further. That was when the shadows began to move. Erebus, Arthur's bonded lich, had been waiting for the perfect moment to act. Now, as Alastor's attention was focused on Arthur's frontal assault, the undead mage opened his domain. Necropolis of Forgotten Wisdom. Reality twisted. The training ground's familiar features faded, replaced by an endless expanse of ancient ruins and floating tomes. Spectral energies swirled through the air, and the very atmosphere grew heavy with accumulated knowledge and barely restrained necromantic power. It was a false domain, one created from the power of a supernatural gift, but it was remarkably effective nonetheless. Alastor's gift of Sage's Eyes automatically activated, dissecting the domain structure and analyzing its capabilities. The spell work was impressive, showing a level of sophistication that spoke to both Erebus's ancient knowledge and Arthur's growing understanding of advanced magical theory. Then Alastor crushed it, not with any particular technique or counterspell, but simply by exerting his will. The necropolis shattered like glass, its fragments dissolving back into ordinary mana as Alastor's superior magical authority reasserted the natural order. Arthur used the moment of domain collapse to close the remaining distance. His sword vanished, replaced by bare fists as he shifted to close-quarters combat. His knuckles touched Alastor's chest with the precision of a surgeon and the force of a battering ram. Sixth movement of Grade 5 CQC art, 0-inch punch. The technique was designed to deliver maximum force at minimum distance, transferring magical energy directly through the target's defenses. Arthur's fist carried enough power to shatter stone, compressed into an impact area smaller than a coin. Alastor absorbed the blow with nothing more than a thin layer of protective mana around his chest. Even so, he felt the substantial force behind the attack. Powerful indeed. But Arthur wasn't done. Even as his punch connected, dark energy began to unfurl from his back. 2 wings materialized, not the traditional single-element constructs that most mages managed, but something far more complex. Alastor's eyes widened once again as he recognized what he was seeing. Wings of deep dark and pure light. The opposing energies weren't fully combined. That would have been beyond even Arthur's considerable abilities. But they were balanced in a way that created something entirely new. It was a modification of a divine miracle, one of the legendary techniques that existed more in theory than practice. Wings of Eclipse. Dark feathers spread across the training ground, each one imbued with space mana and enhanced by the sensing power of Seraphim's embrace. They moved with their own intelligence, creating a three-dimensional web of sensors and mini-warp gates. Alastor Sage's eyes worked overtime, dissecting the mana composition and power structure of Arthur's creation. The boy had taken multiple high-level techniques and woven them together into something that transcended the sum of its parts. It was the kind of innovation that appeared perhaps once in a generation. Arthur is strong, Alastor thought with genuine pride and just a touch of concern. Ridiculously strong. At this rate, he'll surpass me soon enough. You did well, Alastor said aloud, his voice carrying warmth and approval. Then he moved. The distance between them vanished in a single step, not teleportation, but just reality-warping abilities that came with being a Radiant Ranker. Arthur's enhanced reflexes, his precognitive abilities, his combat experience, none of it mattered. Alastor's palm met Arthur's face with the measured force of someone who knew exactly how much pressure to apply. Despite the protection of the ancient-grade armor, despite Arthur's considerable defensive abilities, the impact was overwhelming. Arthur hit the training ground hard enough to leave a crater, his consciousness scattered like leaves in a hurricane. The magnificent wings of Eclipse dissolved into motes of fading light, and silence settled over the training area. Alastor looked down at the unconscious young man and allowed his expression to soften into something approaching paternal affection. "Lesson learned, I hope," he murmured. "Now then, let's see about having a proper conversation about my daughter's hobbies." Chapter 654. Masquerade Auction 1. After getting thoroughly humbled by Alastor, an experience that left me with a renewed appreciation for the vast gulf between Ascendant and Radiant rank, I soon departed the northern continent. Not because of the beating, of course. Alastor's lesson had been delivered with the precision of a master educator, and while my pride was bruised along with several other parts of my anatomy, I bore no resentment. If anything, the sparring session had shown me exactly how much further I had to grow. No, I left simply because there was nothing more for me to accomplish in the north. The Ashen Territory's extraction was proceeding smoothly under Rose's capable management. My relationships with the northern nobility were secure, and most importantly, I had urgent business elsewhere. The Red Chalice Cult. The name alone was enough to make my jaw clench with barely suppressed fury. The Red Chalice was a sophisticated organization with tendrils reaching into the highest levels of society, with power that led them to draw against the Eastern continent even after they got reinforcements from the rest of the world. And they had something that I was going to steal. Rose remained in the north, coordinating the final phases of our extraction operations. Her business acumen was invaluable for ensuring we maximized profits while maintaining good relations with the local authorities. Besides, for this particular mission, a smaller team was preferable. I kept the 9-star Dullahan skeleton with me in my spatial storage, a magnificent specimen that would eventually serve to upgrade Erebus's current form. My bonded lich currently inhabited an 8-star blood wyvern skeleton, impressive in its own right but nowhere near his full potential. Of course, the upgrade would have to wait. Erebus was still consolidating his power at 7-star, and attempting to integrate a 9-star skeleton before he'd evolved into an archlich would likely destroy him entirely. Patience was key when dealing with undead evolution. For this mission, I'd brought only Reika with me. 2 people could move through the Empire's territories with far less scrutiny than a larger group, and her particular skill set was perfectly suited for what I had planned. "Master," Reika said as we sat in the comfortable cabin of the self-driving car, her violet eyes meeting mine with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Isn't the cult primarily based in the Eastern continent?" Over the past few days, she'd grown noticeably more comfortable around me. The nervous stammering had largely disappeared, replaced by a more natural warmth that made my chest tight with affection every time I witnessed it. She was still formal, old habits died hard, but there was an easiness between us now that hadn't existed before our confession. "It is," I confirmed, watching the countryside roll past our window. "But they have a significant branch operating within the Empire. The same branch that housed Bishop Vale." The moment I spoke that name, Reika's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Her hands clenched involuntarily in her lap, and I could see the old memories threatening to surface. Memories of pain, experimentation, dehumanization at the hands of a man who'd viewed her as nothing more than raw material for his twisted research. Without hesitation, I reached over and placed my hand on her head, stroking her silver hair with gentle fingers. "Don't worry," I said softly, moving my hand down to cup her cheek. "He's dead, and this is revenge." Reika leaned into my touch, her tense muscles gradually relaxing as warmth returned to her eyes. A faint smile curved her lips. Not the brilliant joy I'd seen when she confessed her feelings, but something quieter, more determined. "Yes, Master," she said, nodding with renewed resolve. "For everyone they hurt." I smiled back at her, feeling that familiar surge of protective fury that arose whenever I considered what she'd endured. The Red Chalice had taken a vibrant young woman and tried to break her into a weapon. They'd failed, but the attempt alone was unforgivable. "It's time to begin our infiltration of the Red Chalice," I said, my voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. The heavenly demon clone was my ultimate goal, but tonight would lay the groundwork for everything that followed. Reika's eyebrows rose slightly. She knew I had plans regarding the Red Chalice, of course. I'd briefed her on some of our objectives, but I could see her curiosity about what exactly I intended to accomplish tonight. "Master," she said after a moment, "how exactly will we approach this mission? The cult's security will be formidable, and infiltrating their stronghold seems impossible." I supplied with a grin. "Not quite. You see, Reika, we're not going to sneak into some hidden fortress in the dead of night. We're going to walk through the front door." Her confusion was evident in the slight tilt of her head. "I don't understand." "Tell me," I said, settling back in my seat. "What do you know about high society's darker entertainments?" "Very little," she admitted. "My training focused more on combat and infiltration than social customs." "Well, here's something they don't teach in most academies," I said. "When you have enough money and power, there are certain exclusive events that cater to very specific tastes. Auctions where items of questionable legality change hands for astronomical sums. Private exhibitions featuring artifacts that most governments would prefer remained lost. Underground markets where the wealthy can acquire things that simply don't exist in legitimate commerce." Understanding began to dawn in Reika's eyes. "And the Red Chalice operates such events?" "They host one of the most exclusive masquerade auctions in the Empire," I confirmed. "Once a month, in a different location each time, they gather together the continent's most morally flexible elite and sell them things that would make a normal person's skin crawl. Rare poisons, forbidden magical artifacts, experimental serums." Reika was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of disbelief. "They're that brazen? Operating in the open, even within the Empire's borders?" I shook my head. "Not exactly. The attendees don't know they're dealing with the Red Chalice directly. As far as most of them are concerned, this is just an exclusive auction run by wealthy collectors with questionable ethics. The cult operates through intermediaries and shell organizations. But how do they avoid detection? Surely the Empire's intelligence networks would shut them down immediately if they knew," I finished. "The problem is that some figures of considerable power within the Empire are secretly cultists themselves. They've never been exposed, and they use their positions to provide cover for operations like this." Reika's expression darkened further. "Corruption at the highest levels." "Exactly. This is the most dangerous things about cults, their ability to infiltrate. To the outside world, tonight's auction is just another gathering of eccentric collectors." Reika nodded slowly, clearly beginning to appreciate the insidious nature of the cult's infiltration. "So we attend as potential buyers?" "As a wealthy couple with exotic tastes and deep pockets," I confirmed. "The kind of people who wouldn't ask too many questions about provenance as long as the merchandise is sufficiently unique." "And once we're inside?" I smiled, but didn't elaborate on the specifics. "We gather intelligence, identify key players, and set the stage for our real objective. Tonight's auction is just the first step. Reika looked like she wanted to ask more questions, but she'd learned to trust my planning over the years. The transport began to slow as we approached our destination, a mid-sized city in the Empire's eastern provinces, chosen specifically for its proximity to several known Red Chalice safe houses and its reputation for hosting discreet gatherings of the Empire's more questionable elite. "Master," Reika said as we prepared to disembark, "what identities will we be using?" I grinned, producing 2 sets of forged documents from my spatial storage. The papers were works of art, complete with magical authentication seals that would pass even close scrutiny. "Meet Lord and Lady Ashworth," I said, handing her one set. Recent heirs to a mining fortune from the southern provinces, newly wealthy and eager to spend their inheritance on interesting acquisitions. They're known to be reclusive, which explains why no one at the auction will have met them before. Reika examined the documents with professional interest. "These are excellent forgeries. The best money can buy," I confirmed, "along with magical alterations to our appearance that should be sufficient to maintain the deception for one evening." We spent the next several hours in preparation. I used an artifact to alter my hair color and facial structure, aging myself slightly and adding the kind of soft features that suggested a life of wealth and excess. Reika's changes were more dramatic. Her distinctive violet hair became auburn, her violet eyes shifted to brown, and her typically pale complexion took on a warmer tone. For clothing, we'd acquired the kind of ostentatious formal where that screamed new money trying too hard to impress. My suit was cut from expensive fabric but with slightly gaudy gold threading, while Reika's gown was a masterpiece of imperial fashion that managed to be both elegant and just flashy enough to suit our cover identities. The masquerade element simplified things considerably. While our magical disguises would hold up to casual inspection, the ornate masks we wore provided an additional layer of concealment that would make recognition nearly impossible. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of crimson that seemed disturbingly appropriate, we made our final preparations. The auction was being held in a converted mansion on the city's outskirts, officially a private art exhibition, complete with legitimate security and proper documentation. "Ready?" I asked, offering Reika my arm as we approached the mansion's entrance. She took it with practiced grace, every inch the wealthy socialite. "Ready, darling," she said, her voice taking on the affected accent of imperial nobility. "I do hope they have something truly special for sale tonight." Together, we stepped into the lion's den, ready to face whatever horrors the Red Chalice had prepared for their distinguished guests. Chapter 655. Masquerade Auction 2. The Blackwood Manor stood like a Gothic monument against the darkening sky, its towers and spires reaching toward the stars with an almost predatory hunger. What had once been the ancestral home of a minor noble family had been transformed into something far more sinister, a temple to wealth, power, and the kind of moral flexibility that came with both. Arthur adjusted his ornate golden mask as their carriage pulled up to the circular drive, noting the impressive array of vehicles already present. Sleek magical conveyances worth more than most people's homes sat alongside traditional horse-drawn carriages that spoke of old money and older secrets. The attendees were clearly the Empire's elite, though Arthur suspected few of them fully understood what they were truly participating in tonight. "Quite the gathering," Reika murmured beside him, her own mask, a delicate silver creation adorned with crimson roses, concealing her features perfectly. She'd adapted to her role as Lady Ashworth with remarkable ease, her posture radiating the kind of casual arrogance that came with inherited wealth. "Indeed," Arthur replied, offering her his arm as they disembarked. "The kind of people who collect rare things tend to be interesting individuals." 2 impeccably dressed doormen flanked the mansion's entrance, their eyes sharp despite their servile bows. Arthur noted the way they scanned each guest, the subtle magical detection wards woven into their clothing, the careful attention to detail that spoke of serious security concerns. These weren't ordinary servants, they were professionals, likely former military or intelligence operatives. The foyer beyond was a masterpiece of ostentatious wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors inlaid with precious metals, while oil paintings of questionable artistic merit but obvious expense lined the walls. The air was thick with the scent of rare incense and expensive perfumes, mingling with undertones of something darker that Arthur couldn't quite identify. "Lord and Lady Ashworth," a smooth voice called from across the room. A tall man in an elaborate black and silver mask approached, his movements fluid and predatory. "Welcome to our little gathering. I am Magistrate Corwin, your host for this evening's festivities." Arthur inclined his head respectfully while mentally cataloging everything about the man. Mid-40s, well-built beneath his expensive evening wear, hands that showed calluses despite his obvious wealth, a fighter masquerading as a gentleman. "A priest," Luna commented in his head, confirming his suspicion. "Magistrate," Arthur replied in the affected accent he'd perfected for Lord Ashworth. "Lady Ashworth and I have heard whispers about your collection. We're quite eager to see what treasures you might have available tonight." Corwin's smile was all teeth. "Oh, I believe you'll find our offerings most stimulating. We cater to discerning clientele with sophisticated tastes." His gaze lingered on Reka for a moment longer than strictly proper. "Your lovely wife has exquisite taste in jewelry, I see. That necklace is quite remarkable." Reka's hand moved unconsciously to the sapphire pendant at her throat, a piece Arthur had chosen specifically because its magical properties would help maintain her disguise while appearing to be nothing more than expensive ornamentation. "A family heirloom," she replied smoothly, her voice carrying just the right note of prideful possessiveness. "My dear husband spoils me terribly." "As any sensible man would," Corwin said with another predatory smile. "But please, don't let me monopolize your time. There are refreshments in the East Salon, and I believe you'll find the other guests quite fascinating. The auction itself will begin in approximately 30 minutes. They moved deeper into the mansion, passing through elegantly appointed rooms where small clusters of masked figures engaged in hushed conversations. Arthur's enhanced hearing caught fragments of discussions about shipping routes, political maneuvering, and business ventures that skirted the edges of legality. These people were the Empire's shadow elite, those who preferred to conduct their affairs away from public scrutiny. In the East Salon, they encountered their first clear indication that this was no ordinary social gathering. The refreshment table was laden with delicacies from across the known world, but it was the servers that caught Arthur's attention. Young men and women of exceptional beauty moved among the guests with practiced grace, their eyes holding the glassy emptiness of those under magical compulsion. "Darling," Reka murmured, her voice carefully neutral. "The service staff seems remarkably dedicated." "Indeed," Arthur replied, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly, the very picture of professional discretion. He made note of the subtle magical emanations coming from the servers, the way they moved in precise patterns that suggested careful programming rather than natural behavior. The red chalice's taste for human experimentation clearly extended beyond their laboratories. "Lord Ashworth," a new voice boomed across the salon. A portly man in an elaborate peacock mask approached, his movements slightly unsteady from whatever expensive liquor he'd been sampling. "Baronet Hemsley at your service. I heard through certain channels that you might be interested in acquiring some unique specimens for your collection." Arthur forced his expression into one of polite interest while internally recoiling at the man's obvious meaning. "My wife and I do appreciate items with interesting histories," he said carefully. "Oh, history indeed," Hemsley laughed, the sound carrying an unpleasant edge. "Though I prefer my acquisitions to have futures as well, if you take my meaning. There's something to be said for investments that continue to appreciate over time." Before Arthur could respond to this barely veiled reference to slave trading, a soft chime echoed through the mansion. Conversations gradually died as guests began moving toward what Arthur assumed was the main auction hall. The auction room itself was a study in sophisticated decadence. Rows of plush chairs faced a raised platform where a single spotlight waited to illuminate whatever horrors would be displayed for sale. Heavy curtains blocked the windows, and Arthur noted the discreet magical wards built into the walls, designed to prevent both eavesdropping and easy escape. He and Reka claimed seats near the back, close enough to observe everything while maintaining easy access to the exits. Around them, the Empire's most morally flexible citizens settled in with the eager anticipation of children awaiting a particularly entertaining puppet show. Magistrate Corwin took the stage with practiced showmanship, his mask catching the spotlight as he raised his arms for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily through the room despite the lack of obvious amplification magic. "Welcome to tonight's exhibition. As always, all items come with guarantees of authenticity and discretion. Payment is expected immediately upon successful bidding via secure cryptocurrency transfer, and all sales are final." He gestured toward the side of the stage, where a curtained alcove concealed the evening's merchandise. "Our first item," Corwin announced as the curtains parted, "is a vial of compound V7, extracted from test subjects during the Meridian Institute's Classified Enhancement Program." A collective intake of breath went up from the audience as a temperature-controlled case containing 12 vials of luminescent blue liquid was wheeled onto the stage. The substance seemed to pulse with its own energy, and Arthur could sense the dangerous potential contained within. "The bidding will start at 500,000 crypto," Corwin declared. Hands shot up around the room as the elite began their competition for items that had been obtained through methods that would horrify any decent person. Arthur watched carefully, noting which individuals bid most aggressively, cataloging faces and mannerisms for future reference. The enhancement serum eventually sold for nearly 2 million crypto to a woman in an elaborate butterfly mask who accepted her purchase with the casual indifference of someone accustomed to trafficking in atrocity. "Item 2, Corwin continued as the vials were wheeled away, "is considerably more technological. A prototype neural interface developed by Blackwater Corp before their unfortunate shutdown. This time, a sleek device no larger than a smartphone was brought forward, its surface covered in microscopic ports and pulsing with soft blue light. Arthur recognized the technology neural control implants that could override a person's free will entirely. The bidding was fierce, ultimately reaching 3 million crypto before being claimed by Baronet Hemsley, who looked positively gleeful at his acquisition. "Now then," Corwin said, his voice taking on a note of particular satisfaction, "we come to something truly special. Item 3 is guaranteed to be the highlight of many collections, a complete sample of the Prometheus virus, believed to have been destroyed during the Geneva incident." The gasp that went up from the audience was audible. The Prometheus virus was beyond classified. It was legendary among those who dealt in biological weapons. The medical and military applications alone would make the owner one of the most dangerous individuals on the continent. As the sealed biocontainment unit was brought forward, glowing with warning lights that cast ominous shadows across the auction room, Arthur felt Reka tense beside him. He glanced at her and saw that her knuckles were white where she gripped her fan. The bidding started at 5 million crypto and quickly escalated. Arthur watched the proceedings with growing interest, not in the virus itself but in the reactions of the other bidders. Several individuals were bidding with a desperation that suggested this wasn't mere collecting. They needed that sample for something specific. When the price reached 20 million crypto, only 3 bidders remained active. Arthur recognized 2 of them from intelligence reports, known associates of various criminal organizations with interests in forbidden biological research. The third bidder, however, was someone he hadn't expected to see. Duke Ravencrest, one of the Empire's most respected nobles and a supposed pillar of moral rectitude, was bidding with an intensity that spoke of genuine need rather than casual acquisition. The final bid came from Ravencrest at 25 million crypto, and Arthur filed that information away for future use. The Duke's presence here was interesting enough, but his willingness to spend such an enormous sum suggested the Red Chalice's influence reached even further into the Empire's power structure than he'd suspected. "Excellent," Corwin declared as the Prometheus virus sample was carefully secured in its biocontainment unit for its new owner. "Now, before we proceed to our final items of the evening, I believe a brief intermission would be appropriate. Please, feel free to refresh yourselves while we prepare the crown jewels of tonight's collection." As the guests began to move about, stretching and seeking refreshments, Arthur caught Reka's eye and nodded toward one of the side passages. They needed to use this break to gather more intelligence about the mansion's layout and security arrangements. "Shall we explore a bit, my dear?" he asked loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I'm quite curious about our host's other collections." "Of course, darling," Reka replied, taking his arm, "though I do hope the remaining items live up to the evening's impressive start." As they moved through the mansion's corridors, Arthur's mind was already working on the next phase of his plan. The auction was providing exactly the intelligence he needed, but more importantly, it was revealing the true scope of the Red Chalice's operations within the Empire. Chapter 656. Masquerade Auction 3. During the intermission, Arthur and Reka moved through the mansion's corridors with the casual curiosity of wealthy collectors admiring their host's estate. To any observer, they appeared to be nothing more than a couple exploring the impressive collection of art and artifacts that lined the walls. In reality, Arthur was conducting reconnaissance with the precision of a military strategist. The mansion's layout was more complex than it appeared from the outside. Hidden passages branched off from the main corridors, concealed behind rotating bookcases and false walls that only someone with Arthur's enhanced perception would notice. He counted at least 30 guards positioned throughout the building, far more than necessary for a simple auction, even one dealing in illegal goods. "The security seems quite thorough," Reka murmured as they paused before a particularly grotesque painting depicting what appeared to be a ritual sacrifice. "Indeed," Arthur replied, his attention focused on the magical ward patterns woven into the mansion's architecture. "Our host clearly values discretion above all else." They passed a study where several masked figures engaged in hushed conversation, their voices too low for normal hearing but perfectly clear to Arthur's enhanced senses. He caught references to shipping schedules, laboratory results, and something called the Awakening Protocol that made his blood run cold. "Darling," Reka said softly, her hand tightening on his arm, "perhaps we should return to the auction hall. I wouldn't want to miss the finale." Arthur nodded, but not before making mental note of the study's occupants. The woman in the raven mask was definitely Red Chalice, her magical signature bearing the distinctive taint of blood magic. The others were harder to identify, but their casual discussion of human experimentation marked them as willing collaborators rather than unknowing dupes. When they returned to the auction hall, the atmosphere had shifted. Where before there had been excitement tinged with greed, now there was something approaching reverence. Whatever Corwin had planned for the evening's final acts, it was clearly something special. "Ladies and gentlemen," Corwin announced as the last guests took their seats, "we now come to the crown jewels of tonight's collection. What you are about to see represents months of careful acquisition and preparation." The stage lights dimmed, and when they rose again, a new item had appeared. A sophisticated containment unit holding what appeared to be a sample of some unknown substance that seemed to bend light around itself. "Metamaterial from the Chernobyl 7 incident," Corwin declared, his voice carrying genuine awe. "Harvested from the epicenter of the dimensional breach and stabilized using classified technology. The applications are limitless." Arthur felt his breath catch. Dimensional metamaterial was theoretical at best. The idea that someone had actually managed to harvest and contain such a thing was staggering. More disturbing was the implication of how such an acquisition might have been accomplished. The bidding was immediate and fierce. Unlike the previous items, which had attracted collectors and criminal organizations, this drew the attention of what Arthur recognized as several major political figures. Duke Ravencrest was bidding again, as was a woman whose bearing suggested high military rank despite her elaborate mask. 70 million crypto, called out a voice from the front row that Arthur recognized with a chill. General Morrison, one of the Empire's most decorated war heroes and a man whose public stance against dangerous research was well known. His presence here was more than troubling. It suggested the corruption ran deeper than anyone suspected. The metamaterial ultimately sold for 120 million crypto to an anonymous bidder whose identity was so heavily concealed that Arthur couldn't penetrate it. That level of secrecy suggested either incredible resources or access to technology that put them beyond normal classification. "Magnificent!" Corwin exclaimed as the containment unit was carefully secured for its new owner. "But we are not yet finished." Our penultimate item is something that I believe will appeal to those with more practical interests. This time, what emerged from the curtained alcove made even Arthur's trained composure slip slightly. A young woman, perhaps 16 or 17, stood motionless on the stage. Her eyes held the same glassy emptiness as the server's, but there was something else. A faint luminescence beneath her skin that spoke of magical augmentation. A fully enhanced combat servant, Corwin announced with obvious pride. Trained from childhood in 17 different martial disciplines and enhanced with experimental alchemical treatments. She is capable of feats that would challenge even veteran soldiers, yet remains completely obedient to her owner's commands. Arthur felt Reika's sharp intake of breath beside him. Her hand found his under cover of her fan, and he could feel the tremor of barely controlled rage in her grip. This was exactly the kind of horror that had been inflicted on her, the reduction of human beings to mere commodities. The bidding for the enhanced servant was conducted with an obscene casualness that made Arthur's jaw clench. These people were discussing the purchase of a human being, as if she were a particularly fine piece of artwork or an exotic pet. 2 million crypto, bid a corpulent man whose mask did nothing to disguise his obvious appetites. 3 million crypto, countered a woman whose military bearing suggested she intended to use the servant for purposes even more sinister than slavery. The price climbed steadily, ultimately reaching 8 million crypto before being claimed by someone Arthur couldn't immediately identify. The casual efficiency with which the transaction was completed spoke to how routine such sales had become. As the enhanced servant was led away, Arthur noticed something that made his blood freeze. A small tattoo on her wrist, the mark of the Meridian Institute, one of the Empire's most respected research facilities. This wasn't just any victim. She was someone who had once been a student or researcher, probably reported as missing or killed in an accident. And now, Corwin said, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone, we come to tonight's true masterpiece, something so rare, so unprecedented, that we have had to implement extraordinary security measures. The stage lights dimmed to almost nothing, and when they rose again, Arthur saw something that made him understand exactly why this auction was so heavily guarded. A sleek, crystalline device no larger than a briefcase sat on a pedestal, its surface pulsing with soft blue light. But it wasn't the hardware that made Arthur's blood run cold. It was what the device contained. A complete digital consciousness, Corwin announced, his voice filled with genuine awe. The uploaded mind of Dr. Elena Vasquez, the world's leading expert in quantum consciousness research, captured at the moment of her death and preserved in perfect digital form, complete with all her memories, knowledge, and expertise. The implications hit Arthur like a physical blow. Digital consciousness transfer was the holy grail of both medical science and intelligence operations. With this technology, death became merely an inconvenience, and the knowledge of any expert could be preserved indefinitely. The bidding, Corwin declared, will begin at 100 million crypto. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every major player in the room was bidding, their previous purchases forgotten in the face of this ultimate prize. Arthur watched with growing unease as the price climbed beyond 200 million, then 300, then 400. But more concerning than the bidding itself was the behavior of several attendees. He noticed subtle hand signals being exchanged, quiet conversations that suggested coordination rather than competition. This wasn't just an auction. It was a carefully orchestrated event designed to achieve some specific outcome. Master, Reika whispered, her voice barely audible even to his enhanced hearing. Something is wrong. You've been too calm about all of this. What aren't you telling me? Arthur glanced at her, noting the suspicious gleam in her eyes. Reika knew him too well. She'd recognized that his reactions tonight had been too measured, too calculated. He wasn't just gathering intelligence. He was waiting for something. Before he could respond, the digital consciousness sold for 650 million crypto to a consortium of bidders whose combined resources spoke to planning that went far beyond tonight's auction. Ladies and gentlemen, Corwin announced, his voice carrying a note of finality. This concludes tonight's exhibition. We trust you have found our offerings to your satisfaction, and we look forward to serving your future collecting needs. Arthur felt a chill at the abrupt ending. Something was wrong. Auctions like this typically built to a grand finale, not an anticlimactic conclusion after human trafficking. Unless his enhanced hearing caught subtle movements throughout the mansion, footsteps in corridors that should have been empty, the soft click of weapons being readied, the barely perceptible hum of jamming equipment being activated. This wasn't the end of the auction. It was the beginning of something else entirely. As the attendees began to file out, settling their accounts and arranging for the discreet delivery of their purchases, Arthur remained seated. Reka shot him a questioning look, but he simply shook his head slightly. "We should wait for the crowd to thin," he murmured. "I'd like to compliment our host on such an impressive evening." It was then that Arthur's enhanced hearing caught the first hint of what was coming. Footsteps on the roof, too many and too coordinated to be maintenance staff. The faint hum of magical equipment being activated. The barely perceptible shift in the mansion's ward patterns as external forces began to probe for weaknesses. Arthur felt a familiar anticipation begin to build in his chest. The final phase of his plan was about to begin, right on schedule. The first explosion shattered the mansion's front entrance, sending chunks of masonry flying through the foyer. Shouts of alarm echoed through the building as armed figures in dark combat gear poured through the breach. "Imperial Inquisition!" A voice boomed through magical amplification. "This facility is under investigation for crimes against the Empire. All occupants will submit to immediate detention." Chaos erupted throughout the mansion. Auction guests who moments before had been calmly discussing their purchases were now scrambling for exits that were rapidly being sealed by the attacking force. Magical barriers sprang to life as the mansion's defensive systems activated, while hidden guards emerged from concealment to engage the intruders. In the midst of the pandemonium, Arthur sat perfectly still, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth beneath his mask. "Master," Reka said urgently, rising from her chair as spellfire began to flash through the auction hall. "We need to leave. Now." But Arthur remained seated, his eyes fixed on the stage where Magistrate Corwin was frantically trying to coordinate the mansion's defenses, while simultaneously attempting to secure the evening's more sensitive merchandise. "Master!" Reka's voice carried real alarm now as she saw the knowing expression on his face. "What did you do?" Arthur's smile widened as the sound of combat grew closer. Everything was proceeding exactly as he had planned. The real show was just beginning. Chapter 657. Masquerade Auction 4. Lucifer let out a small exhale as he studied Cecilia's expression, trying to read the motivations behind her crimson eyes. The crown princess of the Slatemark Empire stood before him in her private study, her usually playful demeanor replaced by something far more serious. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the tension in her posture. "Why are you asking me this?" Lucifer asked carefully, his verdant eyes narrowing slightly. "We're not exactly close." It was true. Despite being classmates at Mythos Academy and both being among the most powerful individuals of their generation, he and Cecilia had never developed anything approaching friendship. They were polite to each other, certainly, and maintained the diplomatic courtesy expected between royalty, but their interactions rarely went beyond the superficial. So her sudden request for assistance was more than a little surprising. "Arthur's busy," Cecilia said with a dismissive wave of her hand, though Lucifer caught the brief flash of irritation that crossed her features at the mention of his name. "And we're a bit short on firepower for this particular operation. You're a perfect fit in terms of raw strength. You'd even be able to give the Imperial Knight captains a run for their money." Lucifer scratched his head at her assessment, unsure whether to be flattered or concerned about whatever had prompted such a comparison. "That's quite the compliment, but it doesn't really answer my question. What exactly are you planning that requires someone of my capabilities?" "Tch." Cecilia clicked her tongue in obvious frustration at his continued hesitation, making him narrow his eyes in response. Without another word, she activated a complex holographic display that materialized in the air between them. The moment the images came into focus, Lucifer felt his blood turn to ice. The hologram displayed a series of photographs and documents that made his hands tremble with barely contained rage. Young faces stared back at him, but their eyes held the hollow emptiness of those who had been broken, experimented upon, reduced to something less than human. "Is this real?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper as the full horror of what he was seeing began to sink in. Cecilia nodded grimly, her usual playful demeanor completely absent. "This is the proof we have that tonight's auction is being run by the Red Chalice cult, with Magistrate Corwin serving as one of their priests," she said, pointing to specific sections of the holographic display. "These are images of students who were reported missing from various academies across the Empire. Students who were supposedly killed in accidents or training mishaps." She gestured to another set of documents. "But as you can see, they weren't killed. They were taken, experimented on, turned into this." Her voice carried a note of disgust that Lucifer had never heard from the usually composed princess. "This isn't some small black market deal," Cecilia continued, her eyes hardening. "It's much bigger than that. The Red Chalice has been operating under our noses for years, and tonight's auction is just the tip of the iceberg." Lucifer stared at the evidence, his mind reeling from the implications. Red Chalice cult already caused a massive war against the Eastern continent just last year that was still ongoing, and now they were doing experiments within the borders of the Empire. "Why don't you take an Imperial Knight with you?" he asked, trying to think through the logistics of whatever operation Cecilia was planning. Surely this kind of threat warrants official military response. Cecilia's expression grew even more grim. "Because there could be a bishop present at the auction, and our Imperial Knights are—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They're not prepared for this level of threat." Lucifer frowned. "The Imperial Knights are ascendant rankers. They should be more than capable of handling cultists." "Should be, yes," Cecilia agreed with a bitter laugh. "But the Slatemark Empire has enjoyed peace for decades, while other continents have been embroiled in constant conflict. Our soldiers are skilled, certainly, but they lack the kind of brutal combat experience that comes from facing truly dangerous enemies." She activated another section of the hologram, showing tactical assessments and combat reports. "In terms of raw mana rank, our Imperial Knights could match the bishops of the Red Chalice. But in actual combat, against opponents who've spent years perfecting techniques designed to kill and corrupt, they wouldn't stand a chance." The political implications hit Lucifer immediately. "The Order of the Fallen Flame," he said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Exactly," Cecilia confirmed. "They've ramped up their aggression significantly over the past few months. After going silent following their massive attack on the Tower of Magic 3 years ago, they're back with a vengeance. Our Imperial Knights and other military forces are spread thin across the central continent, dealing with fallen flame cells that seem to be popping up everywhere." She closed the hologram with a sharp gesture. "We can't afford to pull significant forces away from those operations, which means any action against the Red Chalice has to be surgical. Small team, high effectiveness, minimal official involvement." Lucifer nodded slowly, beginning to understand the scope of the problem. "And Arthur is unavailable because—" For the first time since their conversation began, Cecilia's composure cracked slightly. A flash of genuine frustration crossed her features, quickly replaced by something that looked almost like longing. "Arthur said he was busy with work," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Some business matter that requires his immediate attention. He promised to stay with me for 3 days after he finishes. But—" She trailed off, unconsciously glancing at her left ring finger. Lucifer followed her gaze and felt a moment of understanding. The crown princess of the Slatemark Empire, one of the most powerful individuals in the world, was acting like a woman missing her boyfriend. It was almost endearing, if not for the serious nature of their current situation. "I can't wait for him to put a ring on me already," Cecilia muttered under her breath, apparently forgetting that Lucifer was still in the room. Lucifer looked at the princess staring at her bare ring finger with what could only be described as a lovesick expression, and couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. The contrast between her usual commanding presence and this moment of vulnerability was jarring. "Oh, please," Cecilia snapped, suddenly aware of his scrutiny. "You're involved with two girls as well. Don't act like you're in any position to judge." Lucifer felt heat rise in his cheeks at her pointed observation. "That's different," he protested weakly. "Is it?" Cecilia folded her arms and fixed him with a knowing smirk. "Besides," Cecilia continued, her expression growing serious again, "this isn't about my love life. This is about stopping monsters who are torturing innocent people. Are you going to help me or not?" Lucifer looked back at the space where the hologram had been. The images of those hollow-eyed victims burned into his memory. Despite his complicated feelings about working with Cecilia, despite the political implications of involving himself in what was essentially a covert operation, he knew there was only one answer he could give. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Cecilia's smile was sharp and satisfied. "I knew you couldn't ignore something like this," she said with obvious approval. "You're too much of a hero to turn your back on victims who need help." She moved to her desk and activated a secure communication array, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced efficiency. "I've already assembled a strike team, integration and white rankers from the Imperial Guard's Special Operations Division. Good soldiers, but they'll need someone of our caliber to lead them against potential bishop-level threats." The holographic display shifted to show tactical plans and building schematics. "The auction is being held at the Blackwood Manor, about 30 kilometers outside the capital. Intelligence suggests between 20 and 40 attendees, with unknown numbers of Red Chalice operatives providing security." Lucifer studied the plans with growing concern. "This is a significant operation. Are you certain we can't get official support?" "Father knows about it," Cecilia admitted. "But officially, the Empire can't be seen taking direct action based on intelligence that may have been obtained through irregular channels. If this goes badly, it needs to be containable. And if it goes well, then we've struck a major blow against the Red Chalice while maintaining plausible deniability," Cecilia said with satisfaction. "The perfect outcome for everyone involved." Lucifer considered the proposal for a moment longer, weighing the risks against the clear necessity of action. The images of those experimented upon students made the choice easy. "All right," he said finally. "I'm in. When do we move?" Cecilia's grin was triumphant. "The strike team is already assembled and waiting at the Eastern Barracks. We leave within the hour. The auction begins at sunset, and we want to hit them when they're distracted by their own festivities." She moved toward the door, then paused to look back at him. "Oh, and Lucifer? Try to keep up. I'd hate to have to explain to Arthur why I got his rival killed on my watch." "Arthur's not my rival," Lucifer protested. But Cecilia was already heading out the door. "Keep telling yourself that." Her voice drifted back from the corridor, carrying a note of amusement. An hour later, Lucifer found himself standing in the courtyard of the Eastern Barracks, watching as Cecilia addressed their assembled strike force. 30 soldiers in dark combat gear stood at attention, their faces hidden behind tactical masks, but their posture radiating professional competence. "Tonight, we strike against enemies of the Empire," Cecilia announced, her voice carrying the authority of her royal bloodline. "The Red Chalice cult has been operating within our borders, conducting illegal experiments on our citizens. This ends now." She gestured toward Lucifer. "Prince Lucifer Windward will be serving as tactical commander for this operation. His word is to be obeyed as if it were my own." The soldiers nodded in acknowledgement, their discipline evident in their synchronized response. "Our target is the Blackwood Manor," Cecilia continued. "Intelligence suggests multiple high-value targets will be present, along with significant security forces. We go in fast, we secure the evidence, and we extract any survivors we can find." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the assembled team. "Make no mistake, the Red Chalice shows no mercy to their victims. Tonight, we return that favor." Chapter 658. Masquerade Auction 5. I watched through the mansion's shattered windows as the Imperial Strike Force advanced with military precision, and couldn't help but smile at how perfectly everything was unfolding. The sight of Cecilia and Lucifer leading the charge was exactly what I'd been waiting for, though admittedly, seeing them together sent a small spike of possessive irritation through me that I quickly suppressed. This was different from the novel. In the original timeline, Cecilia and Lucifer had infiltrated the masquerade auction together as undercover operatives, playing the roles of wealthy collectors to gather intelligence from within. But now that Cecilia was mine, now that she cared more about protecting what belonged to her than following some predetermined script, she'd chosen a more direct approach. Something delightfully, characteristically brash, like hitting the auction head-on with overwhelming firepower. I had to admit I preferred this version. Subtlety had its place, but there was something satisfying about watching 30 Imperial soldiers storm through the Red Chalice's defenses like an unstoppable tide. The cultists' carefully laid plans were crumbling in real time, their auction guests scattering in panic as magical barriers erupted throughout the mansion. "Reika?" I said quietly, my voice carrying easily to her enhanced hearing despite the chaos around us. "Which one of them can you handle?" I gestured toward the two figures at the forefront of the attack. Cecilia was wreaking havoc with her spell weaving, crimson energy tearing through the mansion's defensive wards like tissue paper. Her low ascendant rank power was on full display as she systematically dismantled every magical protection the Red Chalice had spent months constructing. Beside her, Lucifer moved with the fluid grace of a master swordsman, his mid-ascendant rank strength allowing him to carve through enemy combatants with almost casual efficiency. Ice and fire danced around his blade in perfect harmony, a demonstration of the yin-yang body that made him so formidable. Reika's violet eyes assessed both targets with the analytical precision of a trained assassin, but I could see the hesitation in her posture. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of guilt that made my chest tighten. "Master, if you wish for me to fight him, I would, but winning." Her voice trailed off, and I could feel the weight of her perceived inadequacy settling over her like a shroud. A soft smile tugged at my lips as I reached out to pat her head, my fingers threading through her silver hair with gentle affection. "Don't worry," I said, leaning down to press a kiss to her forehead. "I would never ask you to do something impossible." The truth was, I'd never expected Reika to be able to defeat Lucifer in direct combat. There was a reason he was the protagonist of this world. His combination of raw talent, legendary bloodline, and plot armor made him nearly unbeatable in fair fights. Even for me, defeating the current version of Lucifer without revealing the full extent of my capabilities would be extremely difficult. But that wasn't what I needed her to do. "Just distract Lucifer," I whispered, my lips close enough to her ear that she shivered slightly. "Buy me time to deal with Cecilia. You don't need to win. Just keep him occupied." Reika nodded, her expression shifting from uncertainty to determined focus. "Understood, Master." Before she could move away, I caught her chin gently and tilted her face up toward mine. "Be careful," I murmured, then leaned down to capture her lips in a quick but passionate kiss. The contact was brief but electric, and when I pulled away, Reika's face had flushed a beautiful shade of pink that made her violet eyes seem even more luminous. For a moment, she looked stunned, her usual composure completely scattered by the unexpected display of affection. Then her expression hardened into the mask of a professional killer, and I was reminded that beneath her shy, devoted exterior lurked one of the most dangerous assassins in the world. It was time for me to deal with my beloved crown princess. Cecilia's breath caught as the well-dressed figure approached through the shadows. The ornate golden mask that concealed his features wasn't what made her freeze. It was the suffocating weight of his presence pressing against her senses like a physical force. "He's stronger than me." The realization sent ice through her veins. Crimson mana ignited in her palm, casting dancing shadows across the walls. "I will." Her words died as his fist, wreathed in shifting gravity astral energy, materialized inches from her face with impossible speed. Cecilia twisted desperately aside, the displaced air from his strike whistling past her ear. Her palm found his stomach in the same fluid motion, and she channeled her witchcraft into a devastating seven-circle spell designed to obliterate his abdomen from within. Killing blow. His hand closed around her wrist with casual indifference. The spell simply ceased, not dispelled, not countered, unmade, as if it had never existed. Cecilia's eyes widened in shock just before his other fist buried itself in her gut. The impact drove the air from her lungs and sent her skidding backward across the cobblestones. Offset? No. Unraveled? Impossible. Her mind raced through possibilities as she struggled to breathe. It's a gift. His supernatural ability can dismantle spells at the fundamental level. A grin spread across her face despite the pain radiating through her torso. I'll put more power in it this time. Cecilia embraced her witchcraft fully. The crimson crown materialized above her head, a jagged circlet of concentrated chaos that marked the release of her complete power. Witchcraft, the mind aspect gift that bent reality to her chaotic will. She began weaving multiple incantations simultaneously, her fingers dancing through complex patterns. Fire, ice, lightning, and spatial distortion, all tinged crimson by her gift's influence. These composite spells wouldn't unravel so easily. The masked man raised his hand with infuriating calm and began his own multicasting. For perfectly formed spells took shape in the air, each one precisely calibrated to intercept hers. The magical forces collided in a shower of sparks and dissipating energy. Cecilia stumbled back another step, sweat beading on her forehead. At least I'm the superior spellcaster, she thought, already weaving the patterns for another seven-circle construct. The man drew back his fist, but this strike was different. Two distinct layers of astral energy coiled around his knuckles, and between them, tiny motes of deep dark energy pulsed like malevolent stars. Cecilia's blood turned to ice, not because of the deep dark manipulation, but because she knew this technique. She had seen it 1,000 times before, practiced alongside its wielder, laughed as he showed off the intricate layering that was his signature. No, can't be. Her carefully crafted spell dissolved, forgotten, as the devastating realization crashed over her like a tidal wave. Arthur. The name echoed in her mind like a death knell. Her Arthur, her partner, her betrayer. Tears began streaming down her face, hot and bitter. All those missions together, all those quiet moments of trust, all those promises whispered in the dark, lies. Every single moment had been a lie. She couldn't fight him. She couldn't face him. She couldn't bear to look at that golden mask knowing who wore it. Her gaze drifted upward to the precariously balanced debris hanging from the damaged building above. One precisely placed spell, one moment of catastrophic structural failure, and the pain would stop. I can't, she whispered, raising her trembling hands toward the weakened supports. I can't do this anymore. The seven-circle spell blazed to life, aimed at the weakened support beams overhead. Stone and steel began to groan ominously as her magic ate away at their structural integrity. Through her blurred vision, she saw Arthur's posture change. Panic flashed across his body language as he realized what she intended.
Cecilia, no.
He lunged forward, not to attack, but to tackle her away from the impact zone. But he was too late, the spell had already done its work. Tons of debris began their deadly descent, and there was nowhere to run. So instead, he threw himself over her, his broader frame shielding her from the crushing weight above. The impact was thunderous. Dust and fragments rained down around them as his arms encircled her, his broader frame taking the brunt of the collapse. She felt his body jerk with each strike, heard his ragged breathing against her ear. Something cracked, not stone but delicate metal. The golden mask split down the middle and clattered to the ground in pieces. Cecilia stared up into familiar features. Sandy brown hair, kind eyes now filled with pain, a face she had trusted above all others. Arthur. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of 1,000 betrayals. Why? The single word broke from her lips like a sob. Why did you? How could you betray me? Chapter 659. Masquerade Auction. 6. I looked down at Cecilia beneath me, feeling the strain radiating through my body where chunks of debris had struck. Thankfully, Mythic Body had absorbed most of the impact, so I wasn't too hurt. Cecilia, I didn't betray you. Please, trust me, I said softly, meeting her crimson eyes with my azure ones. Tears spilled from her eyes, carving clean tracks through the dust coating her face. But despite everything, the pain, the confusion, the devastation, she smiled. I'm glad, she whispered, her voice barely audible before her eyelids fluttered closed and consciousness left her. Did she force herself unconscious? The thought flashed through my mind as I quickly pushed myself up from the debris. Cecilia's breathing was shallow but steady. She'd live, though she needed medical attention soon. A thunderous crash from across the courtyard snapped my attention back to the immediate threat. Reika was being driven back by relentless strikes, her usually flawless defensive stance cracking under the pressure. Lucifer's blade sang through the air with lethal precision, each swing carrying enough force to shatter stone. Cecilia! Lucifer's voice roared across the battlefield as his eyes found me standing over her still form. I quickly activated the disguise artifact again, feeling the familiar tingle of mana reshaping my features just as Lucifer's gaze locked onto me. That was too close. If he'd seen my true face, everything would have been ruined. Lucifer launched himself at me with explosive speed, his form blurring with the enhancement of his gift. I could see the full manifestation of Yin-Yang Body coursing through him, the way his muscles rippled with perfectly balanced opposing energies, how his movements contained both aggressive Yang force and fluid Yin grace. Reika had pushed him far harder than I'd anticipated. Time to end this charade. I deactivated Mythic Body and Soul Vision, feeling their protective layers peel away like shed skin. I activated Soul Resonance again, letting my consciousness expand beyond the confines of my physical form. The world around me became a tapestry of souls, threads of life force weaving through reality itself. I reached out toward Lucifer's soul, past the barriers of flesh and bone, and grasped the essence of his Yin-Yang body. Mine! The gift flowed into me like liquid lightning, its dual nature immediately recognizable. Yang energy surged through my right side while Yin power pooled in my left, the two forces seeking perfect equilibrium within my being. It was like holding a controlled explosion, requiring every ounce of my concentration to maintain balance. Lucifer's blade descended toward my head, a sword of pure judgment, wreathed in white astral energy born from his unique supernatural mana. The attack carried the weight of absolute conviction, as if the universe itself had decreed my destruction. But judgment met judgment. My own sword rose to intercept, now coated in the same white astral energy. The clash sent shockwaves rippling outward, windows shattering in buildings blocks away. We stood locked blade to blade, two opposing forces of nature grinding against each other like colliding stars. Of course, my copied version of Yin-Yang Body was weaker than his original, a pale imitation lacking years of cultivation and mastery. I only managed to hold my ground because of Valeria's influence flowing through our soul bond, and even then, I felt myself being pushed back step by step. What the? How? Lucifer sputtered, shock cracking his usual composure as he stared at the familiar energies coursing through my weapon. You aren't the only one with this talent, I replied, letting mana warp my voice into something unrecognizable. The sound emerged distorted and hollow, like an echo from the depths of a cavern. Lucifer's eyes darkened with understanding and fury. Impossible. That gift is... Reika struck at the perfect moment, appearing behind him like a shadow given form. Her blade whispered through the air toward his exposed back, forcing him to break our deadlock and spin to deflect her attack. The opening lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough. Third movement, Stellar Cascade. This time, I channeled black astral energy instead of white, the inverse of judgment, the power of absolute negation. My sword moved in a series of strikes that mimicked falling stars, each one building upon the momentum of the last. The technique carved through the air with devastating precision, reality itself seeming to bend around the blade's edge. Lucifer barely managed to raise his sword in time. The impact sent him skidding backward across the courtyard, his boots carving furrows in the stone. But when the dust settled, he was still standing, battered, bloodied, but very much alive. I clicked my tongue in annoyance. Damn, I was hoping that would finish it. Lucifer wiped blood from the corner of his mouth. His breathing labored, but his grip on his weapon still firm. You think copying my abilities makes you my equal? I've mastered this gift for over a decade. You're just playing with forces you don't understand. He was right, of course. But I didn't need to match him blow for blow. I just needed to end this confrontation on my terms. Look around you, Lucifer, I said, gesturing toward Cecilia's unconscious form. Your precious friend is barely breathing. Internal bleeding, possible skull fracture, severe mana exhaustion. She has maybe 10 minutes before those injuries become permanent. Lucifer's eyes flicked to Cecilia, and I saw the exact moment his rage transformed into desperate concern. What are you saying? I'm saying you have a choice. Continue this fight and watch her die, or retreat and get her the medical attention she needs. I let the copied yin-yang body energy dissipate, showing that I wasn't interested in continuing the battle. What's more important to you? Your pride or her life? The internal struggle played out across Lucifer's features. His knuckles went white around his sword hilt, every instinct screaming at him to press the attack. But his gaze kept drifting back to Cecilia's pale, still form. This isn't over, he growled finally, sheathing his blade. Whoever you are, whatever you want, I'll find you. And when I do, there won't be any distractions to save you. I'm looking forward to it, I replied with mock sincerity. Lucifer gathered Cecilia in his arms with surprising gentleness, cradling her against his chest. For a moment, the fierce warrior disappeared, replaced by someone genuinely terrified of losing someone precious. Hold on, Cecilia. I've got you. He vanished in a burst of speed, leaving only swirling dust and the lingering scent of ozone. The courtyard fell silent except for the sound of settling debris and distant sirens. I let the disguise artifact deactivate, my true features emerging as the golden mask dissolved into motes of light. Master! I turned to find Reika staring at me with wide, confused eyes. Her usually composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the uncertainty beneath. Why did you? What was all this for? You could have seriously hurt Cecilia. She trusted you. Before she could voice any more questions or concerns, I stepped forward and cupped her face in my hands. Her words died as our lips met, the kiss gentle but firm enough to convey everything I couldn't say aloud. When we separated, her cheeks were flushed and her breathing had quickened. Shoo! I whispered against her forehead. Trust me a little longer. Everything will make sense soon. The sound of approaching footsteps made us both turn. A figure in ornate crimson robes emerged from the shadows at the courtyard's edge, tall, gaunt, with symbols of a chalice embroidered in gold thread across his chest. Magistrate Corwin of the Red Chalice cult. Exactly as I'd expected. My, Corwin said, his voice carrying the oily smoothness of a career politician. What fascinating events we have here. A mysterious masked figure, a battle between gifts and such interesting participants. I smiled, making sure he could see the expression clearly. Perfect. The fish took the bait. Magistrate Corwin, I said with a respectful nod. How convenient that you happen to be in the area during such unusual circumstances. His pale eyes glittered with calculation. Indeed, perhaps we should discuss these circumstances in more detail. I find myself very curious about your unique abilities. I'd be delighted to chat, I replied, slipping my hand into Reika's. After all, I have so much to learn about your organization's interests. Corwin's smile widened, revealing teeth like yellowed ivory. He thought he was the predator who had stumbled upon perfect prey. If only he knew how wrong he was. Chapter 660. Masquerade Auction 7. The abandoned warehouse where Magistrate Corwin had led us reeked of decay and old blood, the scent so thick it seemed to coat the back of my throat. Crimson symbols covered every surface, walls, floor, even the rusted ceiling beams, their meanings lost to anyone outside the Red Chalice cult's inner circle. The artwork was disturbingly beautiful, depicting scenes of mortals kneeling before winged figures with too many eyes. Candles flickered from iron sconces that looked suspiciously like they'd been crafted from human bones, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with life of their own. "Please sit." Corwin gestured to expensive chairs that looked distinctly out of place in the decrepit surroundings. The furniture was clearly high-end, sleek black leather with silver accents, the kind you'd find in a luxury corporate office. His pale eyes never left my face, studying every micro-expression with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. I settled into the chair with calculated ease, keeping Reika close beside me. Her hand found mine naturally. Our relationship was still new, but genuine, and the comfort of her touch helped steady my nerves in this den of fanatics. I could feel the tension radiating from her despite her composed exterior. The subtle way her breathing had quickened, the almost imperceptible tightening of her grip. She was as unsettled by this place as I was, though she'd never admit it. "Magistrate Corwin," I began, allowing a hint of reverence to color my voice. "I must confess, witnessing your organization's power tonight has been enlightening. After everything that happened during the war with the Eastern Continent last year, seeing your forces operate with such precision speaks to true strength." Corwin's thin lips curved into what might charitably be called a smile. "Flattery, my dear friend? How refreshingly honest. Most who seek audience with us attempt more elaborate deceptions." He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. The gesture revealed that his nails were longer than they should be, filed to points that gleamed in the candlelight. "But you intrigue me. That display of power earlier, copying another's gift so perfectly. Such abilities are exceedingly rare." "It's my gift," I said simply, not elaborating on the true nature of my abilities. "I've spent years mastering it, though I'll admit tonight was the first time I faced someone of Prince Lucifer's caliber." "Indeed. A gift of mimicry." Corwin's eyes gleamed with interest. "The possibilities are extraordinary. Tell me, what is the extent of your capabilities? Can you replicate any supernatural ability, or are there limitations?" This was dangerous territory. Too much information would make me appear threatening. Too little would diminish my perceived value. "Physical contact helps establish the connection," I said carefully. "The more complex the ability, the more difficult it is to maintain. And there are some powers that simply resist duplication, abilities tied to bloodline, for example." "Fascinating," Corwin murmured, making a note in a leather-bound journal that had appeared in his hands. "And what brings someone of your talents to seek us out? Surely you could command significant influence in any number of organizations." I exchanged a meaningful glance with Reika before continuing. "Honestly, the war opened our eyes, Magistrate. We fought for the Eastern Continent, believing in their cause, their promises of victory against supernatural tyranny." I let frustration creep into my voice, not entirely fabricated. "But when we saw what your vampiric allies could do, how they carved through our supposedly elite forces like they were children, it became clear we'd chosen the wrong side. The Eastern Continent's propaganda painted vampires as monsters," Reika added softly, playing her part perfectly. "But what we witnessed wasn't mindless savagery. It was power guided by ancient wisdom, strategy that spanned centuries. How can mortal generals compete with beings who've perfected warfare across millennia?" Corwin nodded slowly, approval glinting in his pale eyes. "Wisdom earned through bitter experience. Many of your former comrades still cling to their delusions, unable to accept that they opposed forces beyond their comprehension." He rose from his chair, beginning to pace with predatory grace. "The Red Chalice cult exists to embrace that truth. We seek not to deny the supernatural hierarchy, but to find our proper place within it. To learn from those who have transcended mortal limitations and proven their supremacy on the battlefield. And these Teachers, I prompted carefully. The vampires who crushed our forces so decisively. They're the ones offering guidance. Corwin's smile widened, revealing teeth that were definitely sharper than human norm. Among others, yes, the very beings who demonstrated the futility of mortal resistance during the war. His tone carried a note of satisfaction. I find it particularly poetic when former enemies recognize the wisdom of joining the victorious side. It shows adaptability, intelligence, qualities our vampiric allies value highly. Oh, they do indeed. His expression grew almost reverent. Vampires are not the mindless parasites that mortal folklore would have us believe. They are philosophers, strategists, artists whose canvas is eternity itself. To learn from them, to be granted even a fraction of their wisdom. He paused in his pacing, fixing me with an intense stare. It requires dedication, sacrifice, the willingness to surrender one's limited mortal perspective for something infinitely greater. Perfect. He was taking the bait exactly as I'd hoped. My plan was simple in concept. Secure a vampiric contract with a vampire elder, someone I could manipulate while using lucent harmony to prevent their miasma from truly bonding with my soul. The technique operated on soul-deep resonance frequencies, theoretically capable of creating a barrier that would fool even vampiric senses while keeping my consciousness intact. We understand, I said, injecting just the right amount of hunger into my voice. We've both felt the emptiness of purely mortal existence. The sense that we're grasping at shadows while the real power lies just beyond our reach. Precisely. Corwin clapped his hands together, the sound sharp in the warehouse's stillness. You truly do comprehend the nature of our sacred mission. Most candidates require months of careful conditioning before they can even accept the reality of what we offer. Reika leaned forward slightly, her free hand resting on my arm in a gesture that was both possessive and supportive. The natural intimacy of a new couple still learning each other's boundaries. What exactly do you offer, Magistrate? We've heard whispers, fragments of rumor, but never the complete truth. Contracts, Corwin confirmed, his voice dropping to an almost whisper. Sacred bonds that allow mortals to share in vampiric essence, to taste true immortality while serving a higher purpose. His eyes gleamed with fervent devotion. The chosen few receive direct guidance from their vampiric patron, learning secrets that have been hidden from humanity since the dawn of civilization. And the process? I asked, careful to maintain the appropriate level of reverence. How does one prove worthy of such honor? That varies depending on the individual vampire's preferences. Some favor displays of loyalty, others tests of intellectual capacity or artistic merit. A few. His smile turned predatory. A few prefer more direct examinations of one's willingness to embrace necessary darkness. Necessary darkness. The phrase sent a chill down my spine, though I was careful not to let it show. Whatever rituals this cult practiced, they clearly weren't squeamish about moral boundaries. Of course, not everyone is deemed worthy, Corwin continued. The selection process is rigorous. Many are called, but few are chosen to receive the gift of vampiric covenant. This is it, the opening I'd been maneuvering toward. We understand the honor such a contract would represent. Whatever trials you require, whatever proof of dedication. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted my carefully crafted appeal. I turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows at the warehouse's edge. Another cult member. This one wearing robes of deeper crimson with intricate silver threadwork that seemed to shimmer with its own light. A messenger, by the elaborate insignia on his chest and the deference in his posture. Magistrate, the newcomer said with a respectful bow that was so deep it was nearly prostration. Urgent word. Her Holiness has decided to personally form a covenant with the visitor. The change in Corwin's expression was immediate and dramatic. His eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline, but this time his expression shifted to one of pure elation rather than concern. A personal covenant? With the Pope herself. He turned to me with genuine excitement, his earlier predatory calculation replaced by something approaching awe. My friend, Do you understand what this means? Such honor is reserved for only the most exceptional individuals, those destined for the highest ranks within our organization. The messenger nodded gravely, his hood casting deep shadows across features I couldn't quite make out. Her Holiness was monitoring the evening's events through remote surveillance. She has expressed that his unique abilities warrant direct integration into the inner circle. Cardinal? Corwin breathed, looking at me with something approaching reverence. With such favor from Her Holiness, you could achieve the rank of Cardinal within months. The opportunities, the knowledge that would be open to you. He shook his head in amazement, actually taking a step back as if my presence had become too overwhelming to approach casually. I confess I am envious. In 3 decades of faithful service, I have never even spoken directly with Her Holiness. And here you are, offered personal covenant on your first night among us. The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop several degrees, but Corwin's face was alight with excitement. Pope Alisara Velcroix herself will form your vampiric covenant. Such an honor. He clasped his hands together like a child receiving unexpected gifts. In all my years serving the faith, I have never witnessed Her Holiness take such direct interest in a novice. Alisara Velcroix. Arthur. Reka's voice seemed to come from very far away, as if she were calling to me through deep water. Her genuine concern was evident. She knew something was deeply wrong. Are you all right? You've gone quite pale.